Good evening, my friends. Find yourself a warm corner, turn off the lights, and set your phone aside. Tonight, I won't tell you stories of monsters or ghosts. Tonight, I will tell you about memories. Memories that haunt. Memories no one wishes to recall. They are scars etched deep within the soul. Whispers that only you and I can hear. These are the recollections of those who have brushed against the thin line between reality and the void beyond. Listen closely, because perhaps these memories might also be yours. Story 1. The Sunken Hand. The man had been gone 20 years, 2 decades of city noise, of brick towers and paved streets. Yet when the bus hissed to a stop at the edge of the rural town, the air struck him with a weight he had not expected. Damp, heavy, scented with soil, with leaves turned to mulch, with river water that had been standing too long in its bed. His mother was waiting, thinner than he remembered, her gray hair tucked beneath a scarf. She hugged him, but her arms were stiff, distracted. That night, in their old farmhouse by the woods, she poured him coffee and told him what had happened. It was Martha, she said, her voice low, as though the walls might listen. Old Martha, you remember her? She near drowned in the river last week. He frowned. The river's barely knee-deep this time of year. His mother nodded slowly. That's what makes it worse. The river had always been shallow, lazy, more mud than water by summer. Children waded it without fear. Women washed laundry on its stones. Men cast nets and cursed when they came up empty. But last week, Martha had gone down to rinse linens. She was seen kneeling in the water, humming, her skirt gathered in her lap. Then sudden a scream, a cry so sharp it cut across the fields, startling the birds from the trees. Neighbors ran. They found her thrashing, waist deep though the river should barely have reached her knees. Her arms flailed, water foaming, her mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled to land. They dragged her out by the shoulders. She collapsed in the grass, coughing, gasping, clawing at her leg. And that's when they saw it. On her calf, just below the knee, bloomed the mark. 5 distinct bruises, long, narrow, purplish blue, sinking deep into the flesh. The shape was unmistakable, a hand, the fingers curved as though they had squeezed with all their strength. When she calmed enough to speak, Martha whispered, "It held me. It wouldn't let go." Her eyes were wide, glazed, not the eyes of the shrewd, sharp woman everyone knew. "It?" someone asked. "The hand," Martha said. Her voice cracked. "A hand in the water, cold as stone." The man's mother paused then, her gaze drifting to the dark window. Rain tapped faintly against the glass. "She told us," she whispered, "that she wasn't the first." The son leaned forward. "What do you mean?" His mother's fingers tightened around her cup. Martha said she'd heard it before. From the old women. From a girl who vanished, years ago, while crossing that same river. They always said she ran away. But Martha swears she was taken. The son tried to dismiss it as country superstition, but unease coiled in him. He remembered the river of his childhood. He remembered wading with friends, daring one another to go deeper, laughing when the mud sucked at their ankles. He remembered, too, the strange stillness of the water, how it seemed to swallow sound, to pull its shadows, how it always looked darker than it should have been. That night, lying in his childhood bed, he could not sleep. Rain whispered on the roof. The house sighed, and beneath it all, faint, he thought he heard the river moving, not rushing, not flowing, but shifting, thick and patient, like something alive, just beneath the surface. He rose before dawn and walked the old path through the trees. The air was cool, damp with mist. Birds stirred but did not sing. When he reached the bank, the river lay flat, barely moving, its surface dark as glass. He crouched, dipped his hand. The water clung colder than memory. And for the briefest moment, just as he began to pull his hand back, he felt it. Pressure, the faintest squeeze around his fingers. He yanked his hand free, stumbling backward. The surface rippled, then stilled, as though nothing had broken it at all. That was when he understood. Martha had not lied. Something waited in that river. Something with hands. Morning came heavy with mist. The man rose from his bed, the unease of the river still pressing on his chest. His mother had gone early to market, but her words from the night before lingered. Martha had not been the first. Someone else long ago had vanished in that same shallow water. He needed to hear it himself. Old Martha lived on the edge of the village in a cottage sagging beneath its own weight. Children whispered that she had charms buried under the floorboards, that she muttered to herself when no one was listening. To most, she was a nuisance, sharp-tongued, half feared, half dismissed. But when the man knocked on her door, she opened it without surprise, as though she had been expecting him. Her eyes were bloodshot, her cheeks sunken, her gray hair hanging loose. She limped as she stepped aside, the mark on her leg still visible where her skirt rode up. Bruises, deep and purplish, shaped like fingers clutching. "You want to know?" she rasped, her voice rough as gravel. "I can see it in you. The river touched you already." The man froze. He hadn't told her about dipping his hand, about the faint squeeze he'd felt. "I only heard what happened." Martha sank into a chair by the hearth. "No one just hears about it. Once the river wants you, it makes sure." She told him everything. The day she had gone to wash linens had been ordinary. The water had barely reached her knees. She had hummed to herself, scrubbing, wringing, the same way she had for 50 years. And then, without warning, something wrapped her calf. Not mud, not weeds, not current, a grip. She looked down and saw nothing but water, black and flat. Yet the pressure grew tighter, digging into her flesh, pulling her down. "I screamed," she said, her hands trembling. "Because I knew it wasn't the first time. I'd heard it all my life. Whispers from the old ones. They said a woman, Clara Jessup, vanished there when I was a girl. Just gone. Left her basket of washing on the bank. No one ever found her body." Her gaze hardened. "But I remember the bruises on her mother's arms. She said she felt it too once. The hand. Before her daughter was taken." The man listened, his stomach coiling tighter. Why didn't anyone believe her? Martha laughed bitterly. "People don't want to believe. Easier to say a girl ran off. Easier to say the river is just mud and water." But I saw the look in her mother's eyes. Same look I see in my own mirror now. She pulled her skirt higher, exposing the full bruise. The outline was perfect. Thumb on one side, 4 fingers on the other. The flesh beneath was dark and mottled, as though the grip had been more than muscle. Something older, heavier, pressing deep into the bone. "I couldn't breathe," Martha whispered. "I thought I'd be next. I thought it would drag me under like it did her. But the neighbors came running. That's the only reason I'm still here. They tore me away before it could finish." Her voice cracked. "It wasn't done. You can feel that. It lets go, but it waits." The man left her cottage shaken, her words clinging to him like damp air. As he walked the village road, he noticed faces turning, watching him. They knew where he had been. Some pitied him. Some looked afraid. That evening, at the tavern, he pressed for answers. At first, no one spoke. Men sipped their ale, women stared into their cups. But after a time, an old farmer muttered, "It's true enough. Clara Jessup disappeared in that river, but she wasn't the only one." Another leaned closer, lowering his voice. 2 boys, maybe 20 years back. They went fishing in the shallows. Only their rods were found. People said they drowned, but the water's too low to take both like that. Others nodded grimly. A pattern emerged. Vanishings, whispers, half-remembered tales. Always the river, always the same stretch of water, and always silence afterward, as though the village had agreed not to speak too loudly of it. That night, lying awake in his bed, the man pieced the fragments together. The river had a history, not of floods, not of storms, but of hunger. It had touched generations, women, children, anyone who lingered too long by its edge. And now it had touched him. He could still feel it in his fingers, the faint squeeze, the way the water had seemed to resist letting go. He rose in the darkness and walked again to the river's edge. Mist curled along the surface. The trees leaned closer, their branches bare. He crouched, staring at the black water. His reflection wavered, stretched, distorted, and then he swore he saw it. Another reflection, overlapping his own. Not a face, not even a body, just a hand. Pale, long-fingered, reaching upward from the dark. He stumbled back, his heart pounding. The water stilled, empty, flat as stone. But in his bones, he knew. The river had not forgotten him. It was waiting. Sleep abandoned him. Every time he closed his eyes, he felt the squeeze around his fingers again, cold, steady, deliberate. When he dreamed, the river filled his mouth, heavy and black, until he woke gasping. his sheets damp with sweat. By day, he tried to push it away. He chopped wood. He walked the fields. He shared meals with his mother. But every sound seemed to carry the echo of water, the scrape of wind through trees, the drip of rain from the eaves, even the creak of the floorboards under his boots. The river followed him everywhere. One evening, as dusk settled low and purple across the valley, he found himself drawn back to the banks. He told himself it was curiosity, but deep down he knew better. It was compulsion. The water wanted him near. He crouched at the edge, his breath clouding in the chill air. Mist curled along the surface, veiling it in pale smoke. The river looked shallow, harmless, the kind of place children would splash without fear. But then it moved, not like current, not like ripples. A shape stirred just beneath the surface, pale, elongated. It slid away before he could see it clearly, leaving only a dark trail in the water. He backed up, heart pounding, and that was when he heard it. A cry, high, sharp, frantic, coming from further upstream. He ran along the bank, his boots tearing the grass until he saw her. A young woman, no older than 20, knee-deep in the river. She was thrashing, clawing at her leg, her voice breaking into sobs. "Help me. Please help." Without thinking, he splashed into the water. It was colder than stone, biting through his clothes, seizing his bones. He grabbed her arm, pulling with all his strength, but something pulled back. She screamed, her nails digging into his wrist. He looked down and saw it. A hand, pale as moonlight, long-fingered, wrapped tight around her calf. It pressed into the flesh with impossible force, bruises blooming instantly, the skin sinking as though under iron clamps. The hand had no body, no arm. It emerged from the water itself, as if the river had grown fingers. He pulled harder, his muscles burning. The woman shrieked, half collapsing against him, her eyes wild with terror. Then, from the dark water, more hands surfaced. First one, then two, then a cluster, rising together, pale shapes swaying like weeds. They reached not only for the woman, but for him, stretching upward, curling in the air. The river wasn't shallow anymore. It had depth now, impossible depth, and something inside it wanted them both. With a final roar, he wrenched the woman free. The hand slipped, retreating with a shudder that rippled across the entire surface. They staggered onto the bank, collapsing in the mud. She sobbed into her palms, shaking, her calf already swollen with bruises shaped unmistakably like fingers. He sat beside her, chest heaving, staring at the water. The hands had vanished. The river lay flat, still, as though nothing had happened. But he had seen, he had touched them. And in that moment he understood. The river wasn't haunted by a ghost. It wasn't cursed by memory. It was alive. Not water, not mud, but a thing that wore those elements like a mask. A thing that had patience, a thing that fed. The woman fled back to the village, limping, still sobbing. He stayed behind, frozen on the bank, his eyes locked on the dark expanse. A thought gnawed at him. If it wanted them, why let go? Why not pull them both under? The answer came as a whisper in his mind, cold as the water itself. Because hunger takes time, because despair tastes sweeter when it ripens. The river didn't devour outright. It held, it squeezed, it waited until strength bled away, until hope drowned. Death was not the meal, desperation was. He staggered home, soaked and trembling. His mother clutched his face when she saw him, demanding answers, but he could not speak. He only sat by the fire, staring at his hands, waiting to feel the squeeze again. That night, the dreams returned stronger. He saw the depths this time, the place beneath the current where no light reached. Shapes writhed there, not bodies whole, but fragments, faces pressed into darkness, mouths open in silent screams, eyes staring without lids. Hands, dozens, hundreds, floated loose, drifting like pale weeds. And beneath them all, something vast shifted. Not a body, not a form, only the suggestion of one. An enormity that had no need for shape, only for hunger. When he woke, the sheets were soaked, not with sweat, but with water, cold, dark, reeking faintly of river mud. He sat upright, trembling. The river was no longer content with his visits. It had followed him home. By morning, The village buzzed like a hive struck by a stick. The young woman he had saved limped through the square, her calf wrapped in linen, her voice breaking as she retold the story. She swore there had been hands cold, pale hands rising from the water to drag her down. Some scoffed, as villagers always do, but the scoffing was thin, nervous. They saw the bruises. They saw the fear in her eyes, and for the first time in years, the whispers no longer stayed whispers. The tavern filled with stories. A farmer swore his father had been pulled once, decades ago, but escaped. A mother admitted her grandmother used to forbid the children from playing near the shallows, warning them of the clutch. Even the pastor, stern-faced and skeptical, could not quiet the murmurs. The river had always been part of them, source of water, place of gathering, a mark on the land. But now it was something else, a wound. By dusk, no one went near it. The banks were deserted. Laundry baskets stayed in homes. Nets lay dry and untouched. Children were kept behind doors. Fear had spread through the town like a second flood. The man tried to convince himself it was good, that at least now, with witnesses, people would avoid the danger. No more vanishings, no more quiet denials. But it didn't feel like safety. It felt like surrender, because the river didn't need their belief. It only needed time. That night, he undressed by the fire, his body still aching from the struggle. As he lifted his sleeve, he froze. There, on his forearm, bloomed a bruise. 5 distinct marks. Thumb. 4 fingers. He touched it, wincing. The skin throbbed, tender as though pressed by iron. He remembered the moment in the water, the grip on his wrist as he tried to pull the woman free. At the time, he thought it was hers, frantic with fear. But the shape was wrong. Too long. Too strong. It hadn't been her hand. It had been one of theirs. Panic seized him. He scrubbed the mark with soap, with salt, with scalding water. The bruise remained, dark and patient. When he finally collapsed into bed, the dreams came again. This time, he wasn't just drifting above the depths. He was in them. His limbs hung heavy, his chest burned with lack of air. But still, he did not die. Hands brushed his arms, his legs not pulling, not yet, only stroking, as if testing him. Through the murk, he saw the faces, dozens, floating, slack with exhaustion. Their eyes turned to him, wide, pleading. "Join us," the current whispered. "You're marked now. You're one of ours." He woke with a cry, his sheets tangled, his skin damp and cold. The bruise on his arm burned as though fresh. His mother burst in, pale with worry. "You were shouting," she whispered, saying things in your sleep. He tried to wave her off, but she saw the mark. Her face crumpled. "It's chosen you," she whispered. Her voice carried the weight of old fear, the kind passed from parent to child in hushed warnings. He shook his head. "No, I won't let it." But even as he spoke, he felt the throb in his arm, like a pulse, not his own. The days that followed grew stranger. Animals shied from him. Dogs barked when he passed. Horses rolled their eyes and pulled away from the reins. Even his mother's cat, once fond of curling in his lap, hissed and fled when he entered the room. Villagers glanced at him with unease. They knew he had been in the river. They knew he had touched what lived there. And though they pitied him, they also feared him, as if some of the water still clung to his skin. On the 4th day, he caught his reflection in the wash basin. At first, it was only his own face, hollow-eyed, unshaven, weary. But then another image surfaced faintly behind his shoulder, a pale hand resting on his arm, the fingers long, dripping, curved possessively. He spun, but no one was there. The water in the basin rippled once, then stilled. That night, the knocks began. Not at his door, not on the walls at the window. 3 slow taps. Even. He lay rigid in bed, his breath shallow, listening. Another 3. Then silence. Then again closer, sharper, as though nails scraped against the glass. He forced himself not to move, not to look. But in the silence that followed, he thought he heard a voice, low and gurgling, bubbling as though spoken through water. Soon, he pressed his hands to his ears, but the bruise on his arm throbbed in time with the word. The mark was not fading, it was deepening. The river had claimed him. The bruise never faded. Days passed, then weeks. It darkened, deepened, spreading faintly like ink spilled under his skin. No herb poultice helped, no salt scrub, no whispered prayer. At first, he thought it was the mark of death, that soon his lungs would fill, his heart would fail, his body would be pulled under. But death did not come. Something worse did. It began with his strength. His steps grew slower, his breath shorter. He felt drained, as if each hour siphoned a little more of him into the unseen depths. Sleep brought no rest. Dreams dragged him always back to the river, where hands pressed against him but never quite pulled. They didn't want him gone. They wanted him hollow. The villagers avoided his eyes. They knew he was marked. They saw the pallor in his skin, the tremor in his hands. Children crossed the road when he passed. Mothers hushed their little ones when they asked why he limped, why he looked so tired. Old Martha alone nodded at him knowingly. Her own eyes ringed with sleeplessness. "You feel it, don't you?" she whispered once as he passed her gate. "The hunger. It doesn't kill. It keeps. That's the cruelty of it." She lifted her skirt, revealing her calf, the bruise still there after all these weeks. "We are larders. We are kept like meat, ripening." That night, he sat alone at the window, staring at the fields. Beyond them lay the river, silent, flat, patient. The knocks came again. 3 slow taps against the glass. Then silence. Then 3 again, steady as a heartbeat. He wanted to scream. He wanted to run, but he could not move. The sound wasn't outside, it was inside him, echoing from bone to marrow, from vein to vein. Knock, 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 and with each one, the bruise on his arm pulsed. Not pain, not warning, but hunger. Not his. Theirs. It came to him then, the truth like a blade through fog. The river did not kill for bodies. It did not crave blood or flesh. Those were only vessels. What it fed upon was despair, the slow unraveling of hope, the long, drawn-out agony of knowing escape was impossible. The hand's grip was not to drown, it was to hold, to keep alive long enough for the spirit to wither, for the soul to sag, for the marrow of will to drain away. That was the flavor. That was the feast. He pressed his face into his hands, weeping silently, realizing he was already half-eaten, every hour weaker, every dream darker, every thought tainted with surrender. And still the river waited. It always waited. In the following days, the village grew quieter. Laundry no longer touched the water. Cattle were driven to other streams. People turned their backs on the river and spoke of it no more. But silence was not safety. It was offering. The river did not need them to come. It would come for them. On his final night in the village, he dreamed of the depths one last time. He saw the faces of the lost Clara Jessup, the vanished boys, the countless others swallowed across decades. Their mouths hung open, eyes wide, not dead but drained. And as he drifted among them, he understood. They were not trapped against their will. They were emptied until they had no strength left to resist, and then they became part of the river. He woke with tears on his cheeks, his arm throbbing. The bruise now glowed faintly in the dark, as though lit from within. He knew then he could not outrun it. The river does not forget. It does not release. It waits, as patient as stone, as endless as night. And once its hand has touched you, you are already inside it. And so, I tell you this, if you ever find yourself near still water on a quiet night, listen closely. You may hear it. 3 slow knocks, against glass, against your skin, against the inside of your skull. If you do not answer. Do not lean closer, because it is not death that waits beneath the surface. It is hunger, and hunger is patient. A conversation between dreams. Some dreams arrive like whispers, so faint you barely notice them. Others fall like stones into water, leaving ripples that follow you into waking. His began with a name, Lily. The sound of it lingered on his tongue each morning, though the rest of the dream dissolved like smoke. He remembered only fragments, a face blurred at the edges, a voice like rain on glass, words tumbling into silence as he opened his eyes. But the name remained, fresh and vivid, as though someone had spoken it into his ear moments before he woke. At first, he thought little of it. He had always been sensitive, prone to strange dreams, half believing in the superstitions his family whispered but never spoke aloud in daylight. He told himself it was imagination, the result of a restless mind. But the dreams returned. Each night, she was there, the same girl, young, soft-eyed, her hair spilling like shadow. She would sit with him in places he couldn't quite place, sometimes in a room without windows, sometimes under a sky with no stars. They would talk for hours, or what felt like hours. He remembered laughing, nodding, listening intently, and then morning would come, and the words would vanish, every word but her name. By the fourth night, the pattern was clear. He woke with the same dull ache in his chest, the same certainty that something important had been said and lost. His sheets smelled faintly of earth, though his window had been shut. His lips were dry, as if he had spoken too long in his sleep. Still, the name pulsed in his mind. Lily. He wrote it in his journal, circled it, stared at it until the letters seemed to shift. That evening, as he brushed his teeth, he thought he heard someone whisper it behind him. He turned quickly, but the mirror showed only himself. By the sixth night, his unease sharpened into fear. This time he remembered more. He remembered her leaning close, her breath warm against his ear. "Don't forget," she said. Her voice had been urgent, almost pleading, and when he asked what he was not to forget, she smiled sadly. "Our appointment, our night." He woke with his heart racing, the name thrumming through his head like a bell. The seventh night sealed it. He dreamed again, and this time, her face was clearer than ever. Pale skin, eyes dark as river water, lips curved in something between kindness and sorrow. "Tomorrow," she whispered. "It's time." He tried to ask what she meant, but already the dream was unraveling. Already the words dissolved into morning. He woke trembling, the sun bright through his curtains, the word tomorrow echoing in his skull. That day, he told his mother, he expected her to smile, to dismiss it as youthful fancy, but instead, her face blanched, her lips tightened. "Lily," she whispered. "You dreamed of Lily?" He nodded, uneasy. "Do you know her?" His mother looked away, toward the window, as though the light there could shield her. "She was a girl from here," she said finally. "She lived down by the creek. Sweet, quiet child. She disappeared when you were very small. No one ever found her. People stopped speaking of it, but I remember." Her voice shook. "Don't go to her again. Promise me." He laughed nervously. "It's only a dream." But his mother reached across the table, her hand gripping his wrist. Her eyes were fierce, almost frightened. "Some dreams are not ours. They come looking, and once they find you, they don't let go." That night he went to bed early, though sleep did not come easily. He lay awake, listening to the creak of the old house, the sigh of the trees outside. He thought of his mother's face, the fear in her voice, and when at last he drifted into sleep, Lily was waiting, not in a room, not under a sky. She stood before him in a place that had no edges at all, a place of pale fog, endless and shifting. She smiled when she saw him. "Finally," she said softly, "you remember. Tonight is the night." His mother woke him before dawn. Her voice was hushed, urgent, and left no room for refusal. "Get up," she whispered. "We must go." He rubbed sleep from his eyes, the remnants of fog still clinging to him. The echo of Lily's voice whispering, "Tonight is the night." "Where?" he asked, his voice hoarse. She did not answer at first. She only lit the lantern and pressed his jacket into his arms. Her hands shook. "To the clearing," she said finally. "There are things you don't understand. Things you shouldn't." They walked the old road in silence. The air was damp with dew, the earth soft beneath their feet. The woods loomed around them, branches arching overhead like ribs. He carried the lantern. Its glow spilled weakly, catching fog that seemed too thick, too heavy, as though it resisted being lit. The clearing lay at the edge of the trees, an oval of barren soil where nothing grew. He had played there as a child, chasing shadows, never knowing why his mother forbade it. Now, he saw it differently. The ground was cracked, the air colder, as though something beneath lay restless. His mother knelt in the dirt. From her shawl she pulled a small tin, worn smooth with age. Inside were fragments of herbs, a vial of water, a piece of chalk. She began to draw on the ground, her hands steady, her lips moving in words he did not know. He watched, uneasy. "What are you doing? Keeping you safe?" she murmured. The chalk lines formed a circle, enclosing them both. She sprinkled the herbs, poured water at the edges, whispered names that did not belong to anyone he knew. The fog thickened. The trees seemed to lean closer, and then he felt it, the same chill that had haunted his dreams. The brush of presence, the prickling of unseen eyes. The air pressed heavy. The silence deepened. And from that silence, a figure began to form. It was Lily, not in dream's haze, but here standing just beyond the circle, her shape wavering as though carved from mist. Her eyes were exactly as he remembered, dark, endless, filled with something like longing. Her lips curved into a soft, sorrowful smile. "You came," she whispered. His chest tightened. His breath caught. "Lily." His mother's hand clutched his arm. "Don't answer her," she hissed. "Don't speak." But it was too late. His voice had already left him, weak, trembling, the syllables of her name ringing in the clearing. Lily's form solidified. She stepped closer. Her dress shifted like smoke, her hair spilling loose. "You don't remember our words," she said, tilting her head. "But you remember me." He swallowed hard. "What? What do you want?" Her smile deepened. "Only to keep our appointment." His mother's chant grew louder, faster, the circle trembling with her effort. She sprinkled the last of the herbs, her voice breaking. "Stay back," she cried. "He is not yours." But Lily only laughed, soft and sad. "Not mine? He's been mine for 7 nights now. He answered me. He spoke my name. That is all it takes." Her gaze turned back to him, and in her eyes he saw something vast, something that stretched beyond this clearing, beyond the years. "Do you remember?" she whispered. "You promised me. You said you would bring me home." His stomach dropped. He shook his head, desperate. I never—" "Yes," she interrupted gently. "You did. In the dreams. You gave me your word." The air snapped cold. His breath came white. His mother clutched his hand, her knuckles white. "Look at her face," she said, voice trembling. "Do you not see? That girl is not what she was. She is bound. She is hungry." But his heart wavered, for in Lily's eyes was not hunger, but grief, and he could not tell which was true. The fog swirled tighter. The trees groaned. Lily leaned close, her form pressing against the circle's edge. The chalk hissed, flared, as though resisting. "Tonight is the night," she said again. "Don't break your promise now." Her hand rose, pale, trembling, reaching across the line. The air throbbed with power, with yearning. He felt his own hand lift, against his will, fingers aching to meet hers. His mother cried out, throwing the vial of water across the circle. It burst in a hiss, steam rising, the ground shuddering. Lily's form flickered, blurred. Her eyes widened not with rage, but with sorrow so deep it pierced him. Then she was gone. The clearing fell silent. Only the drip of water remained. His mother sagged to the earth, exhausted. He knelt beside her, his body shaking, his hand still tingling where hers had almost touched. "She's gone," he whispered. His mother shook her head. "No, she's waiting, and she will not wait long." That night, when he closed his eyes, the dreams did not come. The fog was empty. The silence was complete, and somehow, that absence was worse than her presence. For 3 nights, the dreams stayed empty. He slept, but no fog came, no voice, no whisper of the girl who had haunted him. The silence was worse than her presence. He would wake gasping, sheets tangled, half reaching into the dark as though she might be standing there, waiting. His mother said it was the ritual, that the circle had cut the cord, that Lily was gone. But he knew better. Promises don't vanish. They linger. They wait. On the 4th night, it happened. He woke, or thought he did. The room was the same. The wooden beams above, the faint crack of the house in the wind. But the light was wrong. Too pale, too silvery, as if the moon had poured itself into his walls. And then he saw her, Lily. Not hazy this time, not mist. She stood at the foot of his bed, clear as any living girl, her hair loose over her shoulders, her dress hanging damp and heavy. "You tried to shut me out," she said softly. "But promises don't break so easily." He tried to speak, but his voice caught in his throat. She moved closer. Her bare feet left no sound on the boards. Her eyes were the same, dark, fathomless, filled with something he could not name. "Do you remember?" she whispered. You said you would help me. You said you would take me home. His chest tightened. Fragments of dream returned. Her face leaning close, her words tumbling into him. The weight of his own nod. His own lips moving. Yes, I'll help you. Yes, I'll come. I didn't mean it, he stammered. I didn't know. Her expression flickered pain, sharp as glass. But I did. She lifted her hand. Pale fingers brushed his arm, cold and heavy, though she did not truly touch him. The air rippled between them, as though the space itself bent. Tonight is the night, she said again, the words as inevitable as tolling bells. You promised, and I have been waiting so long. He shook his head, trembling. What do you want from me? Her eyes shone with something like sorrow, something like hunger. Only what you offered, she said, a way home. The room darkened. The walls bent. He realized with horror that he was no longer in his bed at all. The boards warped into soil. The ceiling dissolved into fog. He was back in the clearing. The same circle his mother had drawn, only now the chalk was broken, scattered, useless. The trees leaned inward, groaning. The air reeked of damp earth, of water gone stale. And Lily stood before him, more solid than ever, her breath misting in the cold air. She smiled faintly. Do you see? This is the place. The night we spoke of. The night you would come with me. His knees weakened. Where? Where are you taking me? She tilted her head, as if puzzled by the question. Not where. Back. To the place I left. To the place I wait. The ground at her feet darkened, softening, water seeping through cracks. It spread outward, pooling, becoming black as glass. The clearing was no longer dry earth but a mirror of water, shallow at first, then deepening into something endless. And in its reflection, he saw not the trees above but a void without stars. She stepped onto it as if it were solid, her bare feet rippling the surface. Do not be afraid, she whispered. You've already agreed. You've already begun. Her hand extended toward him. Her fingers trembled, not with weakness, but with anticipation. He felt his own hand rise, not from choice, but from gravity, from inevitability, as if a cord ran from her chest to his. The cold seeped into him, starting at his marked wrist, spreading upward, pulling. A voice rang out his mother's, distant but fierce. No, don't take him. He turned. She was there, standing at the edge of the clearing, clutching her shawl, her face pale in the moonlight. She raised her hands, muttering words he did not know, her voice breaking with force. But Lily did not falter. Her gaze never left him. He chose, Lily said simply. You cannot unmake a promise. The ground shuddered. The water spread wider. His mother stumbled back, crying his name, but her voice sounded far away, muffled, as though she were speaking through glass. Lily's face was close now, her breath cold against his cheek. Come, she whispered. It is time. Her hand touched his, the chill-pierced bone sharp and final, and in that instant, memory rushed back. The dreams he had forgotten, their endless conversations came flooding in. He saw her leaning close night after night, telling him her story, telling him she was lost, telling him she needed someone to guide her home. And he, lulled by her sorrow, had promised. Again and again, he had promised. The clearing dissolved. His mother's voice faded. He was falling, not through air, through water, black, endless, pressing, her hand in his, her face pale beside him, and beneath them both, something stirred, not earth, not stone, a place waiting, a place that smelled of roots and grave soil and silence, a place she called home. He woke gasping in his bed, soaked with sweat, the sheets clinging to him. The house was silent, the moonlight ordinary, but his hand was cold, his wrist ached, and on his skin, faint but visible, were words traced in dampness, as though written by unseen fingers. Tonight is the night. At dawn, his mother found him trembling on the floor beside his bed. His skin was damp with cold, his lips nearly blue. She cradled his head in her lap, whispering prayers she had not spoken since childhood. But no prayer could thaw him. His eyes opened slowly, clouded, distant, as though he had woken into the wrong world. I was with her, he murmured. His voice rasped, brittle. She showed me where she waits. His mother wept. No, child. She's gone. Let her rest. Do not let her drag you down. but he shook his head weakly. She isn't gone. She's closer than you. By midday, word spread. The villagers whispered outside his mother's cottage, their eyes sharp with suspicion, with fear. Children pressed their faces against the glass until scolded away. They had heard of the dreams, of the girl who came each night, of the way his body had been found cold as a corpse at dawn. Some crossed themselves, muttering of curses. Others murmured of bargains, of bonds that should never have been made. And beneath it all, the name passed from mouth to mouth, like a hidden draft of wind. Lily, the girl who had disappeared, the girl no one dared to speak of, now walking again through the mouth of a dreamer. The young man tried to live as before. He chopped wood, he fetched water, he ate at the table with his mother, but everything felt wrong. The axe grew heavy in his hands, as though the wood resisted him. The bucket trembled on the rope, the water rippling though no wind touched it. Food tasted faint, thin, as if the flavor had already been drawn out. The villagers noticed. His skin was paler each day, his shadow faint, his reflection in water delayed. When he leaned over the well one evening, he saw his face staring back not as it was, but as it might be, drowned and swollen, lips parted, eyes unblinking. He stumbled away, gasping. Nights were worse. The dreams did not return as before, but Lily did. Not always in full form, not always with words. Sometimes just her voice brushing the air, a whisper at his ear. Soon, sometimes just her shadow leaning long across his wall though no light shone to cast it, and sometimes her hand, resting lightly on his wrist as he drifted into half-sleep, the same wrist that still ached from her touch. Each morning he woke weaker, as if his breath had been borrowed for someone else's lungs. His mother grew frantic. She sought out the oldest women in the village, begged for charms, for prayers, for rituals. They gave her bundles of dried herbs, strings of iron keys, chalk to mark the thresholds. She scattered salt across the doorway, drew circles beneath his bed, kept candles burning all night. But nothing held her back. The house groaned under Lily's weight. Glass fogged with her breath. Water dripped from beams as if rain had seeped inside. One night, his mother swore she saw her, standing at the foot of her own bed, pale and dripping, her eyes fixed not on her but on her son, asleep in the next room. She rose with a scream, and the figure vanished. By dawn, her son's bed was soaked as though it had been lowered into a river. The villagers grew restless. They began to whisper louder. Some demanded the priest come and drive out the spirit. Others suggested harsher remedies. It isn't just him anymore, one said. If she walks here, she'll walk among us all. She'll take another like before. Fear spread faster than pity. The young man felt it in every glance, every silence when he entered a room. They looked at him as though he was already gone, as though he was no longer one of them. And he knew they weren't entirely wrong. For sometimes, when he passed the mirror, he saw her face beside his. Sometimes, when he spoke, he swore another voice threaded through his own, faint, echoing, like two people speaking from the same mouth. Once, as he stood at the window, he lifted his hand to the glass, and in the reflection, it wasn't his hand that touched it. It was hers, slender, pale, dripping. He staggered back, his heart pounding. His mother begged him not to look anymore. But what choice did he have? The line between them was thinning. He could feel it. He began to wonder if he still dreamed, or if he had never woken at all. At night he would pace the cottage, pressing his palms against the walls, feeling the throb of dampness under the wood. He would listen to the drip of water in corners where no leak existed. He would smell the faint musk of riverweed in the sheets of his bed. And always, her voice. "You promised. You said you'd help me," he whispered back once, against his better judgment, his lips trembling. "I don't know how." And silence. Then gently, "Yes, you do. You already began." By the end of that week, he stopped trying to convince himself. He was not whole anymore. He was not only himself. Each time he blinked, he feared he might open his eyes into her world instead of his. Each breath felt borrowed. Each step felt tethered, as though another set of feet pressed down beside his. He was living half here, half there, neither awake nor asleep, neither alive nor dead. And the worst of it was not fear. It was recognition, because sometimes when she whispered in the dark, his heart leapt not with dread, but with longing. He missed her when she was gone. He wanted to see her face again. Time passed. The village settled into its old silence, though it never felt the same. The young man lived, but not as before. His skin never regained its color. His eyes always held a shadow. He worked when he could, spoke little, laughed less. Some said he had survived an illness of the spirit. Others said he was still marked. No one dared ask him directly. And slowly, as years wore on, people forgot, or pretended to. He never dreamed of Lily again, at least, not in ways he could recall. His nights were black, dreamless, empty as a locked room. He told himself it was over, that the ritual had worked, that whatever had claimed her had released him. But sometimes, when he stood near water, his wrist would ache, a dull throb, faint but insistent, like a memory trapped in bone. He ignored it. He married. He grew older. He buried his mother. Life folded into itself like layers of cloth. But the silence never felt safe. It felt like waiting. It was nearly 20 years later when the package arrived. No sender's name, no return address, just a parcel wrapped in brown paper, bound with twine. He opened it at the kitchen table, his hands trembling though he didn't know why. Inside lay a book, small, leather-bound, worn soft with age. A diary. The name pressed faintly on the first page stopped his breath. Lily. His fingers shook as he turned the pages. The handwriting was delicate, looping, filled with the ordinary notes of a girl's life. Chores, weather, fleeting thoughts. Yet woven through were threads of something darker, mentions of dreams, of standing at the edge of places that did not belong, of waiting for someone who never came. He read late into the night, the lamp burning low. His pulse quickened with each entry, as if the words themselves reached for him. And then, near the end, his hands froze. The last page. It was dated the year she had vanished. The ink was darker, fresher somehow, as if written yesterday. Today I met someone. Someone who can help me. He said he would take me home. The script was hers, until the final line. The final line was not. The strokes were different, jagged, unmistakably familiar. It was his own handwriting. I promised her I would. He dropped the book. It hit the table with a heavy thud, pages fluttering open like wings. His breath came ragged, his chest tight. He backed away, shaking his head. No, he whispered. I never wrote that. I never. But even as he spoke, his wrist ached sharper now, burning, as though the words had been carved not with ink, but with pressure beneath his skin. He looked down. The old bruise was gone, faded decades ago. But tonight, in the lamplight, something shimmered faintly across the veins. Letters. Her name. The silence of the house deepened. The lamp flickered, shadows stretching long across the floor. And from somewhere he could not tell if it was outside or within came a voice. Soft, familiar, inevitable. Do you remember now? Our appointment is not over. The book lay open on the table, its pages fluttering though no wind blew. The last line glowed faintly, the ink darkening, freshening, as though the words were being written again and again, endlessly renewed. I promised her I would. And perhaps he had. Perhaps he always had. Perhaps promises made in dreams are not dreams at all, but contracts. And when the ink is written in memory, it never fades. So if you ever wake with a name on your lips, soft, strange, belonging to no one you know, do not speak it aloud. Do not answer, for once you do, the promise is already written, and one day, perhaps years from now, you may find a package waiting on your table, and inside it, the last page will be yours. The third on his shoulder. Reunions are supposed to be warm things. Smiles, laughter, old stories polished by time. But this one began with a silence. A silence shaped like the absence of a friend. His name was Mark, and he should have been sitting with them that night. Instead, his memory filled the empty chair like a ghost no one dared to mention. The hotel lounge glowed with amber light. Glasses clinked, ice melting slowly. The smell of whiskey mingling with polished wood. 6 friends gathered around a low table, a circle that once would have been 7. They hugged, they smiled, they compared the lines on their faces and the years in their hair. They spoke about jobs, marriages, children. On the surface, it was comfortable, even cheerful, but the empty chair stayed heavy between them. Eventually, someone broke the dam. It still feels strange without him, Jennifer murmured, her voice tight as she stirred her drink. 10 years, and I still don't understand it. Mark was always the careful one, the last person you'd expect to go like that. Heads nodded, glasses lowered, eyes slid away. The memory hung there, inevitable. Graduation night, the heat of summer, the traffic lights glowing red against the dark, a group of friends celebrating their last hours together, and Mark stepping into the street before the light changed. A truck, brakes screaming, the blur of headlights, and then silence. For years they had told themselves it was an accident. Wrong place, wrong time, a misstep, nothing more. But one of them had never believed that. Dave. He sat at the edge of the group now, his face half in shadow. He had not wanted to come tonight. He had almost stayed away, but guilt had a way of calling him back. As the conversation thickened, circling closer to the memory they all feared, he felt the weight in his chest grow unbearable. And finally, when Jennifer's voice cracked, he spoke. There was something with him, Dave said softly. The words landed like stones in water. At first, no one understood. What do you mean? Someone asked, half laughing, half afraid. Dave looked into his glass, watching the ice melt. That night, at the crosswalk, before he stepped into the street, I saw something none of you did. They leaned in. The air shifted. The lounge, with its chatter and music, seemed suddenly distant, muffled. Dave's hand trembled as he set down his drink. It was on his back. A shadow, not his shadow. Something else. Something clinging to him, heavy, like a rider on a horse. The others stared. Uneasy laughter stirred again, but no one quite met his eyes. I know how it sounds, Dave said quickly. We'd all been drinking. We were celebrating. But I wasn't that drunk. I remember every detail. He drew a shaky breath. His voice dropped lower. It had arms. Long, thin arms wrapped around his shoulders. Its head bent close like it was whispering to him. And when Mark leaned forward, ready to cross, it leaned with him. Jennifer shook her head. Dave, that's crazy. You're saying something pushed him? Dave's eyes were glassy. Not pushed, pulled. It pulled him forward like he wasn't in control anymore. For a moment, silence reclaimed the table, and then Dave added the part that had haunted him most. When I tried to call out, it turned. The thing. It turned its head and looked straight at me. His voice broke. He pressed his knuckles against his mouth, as though holding back a scream he had saved for 10 years. It didn't have eyes, just hollows, and then it smiled, wide, like it knew me, like it knew I could see it. The table went still. The hum of the lounge beyond their corner seemed impossibly far away. Dave closed his eyes, and then Mark stepped into the road, and the truck, his breath hitched. You know the rest. Someone tried to laugh. It came out thin. You're saying a ghost killed him? Dave shook his head. Not a ghost. Something worse. Something that waits for people who can't see it coming. He looked around the table, his gaze heavy, lingering on each of them. And I'll tell you something else. His voice lowered to a whisper, harsh and final. When you see a spirit, it sees you too. And if you know its secret, he swallowed, the words scraping his throat. You're the next one it comes for. The silence stretched too long. It was Jennifer who broke it first, her laugh thin, brittle. Dave, that's insane. You really expect us to believe some shadow monster killed Mark? Her words tried to sound sharp, but her fingers trembled against her glass. Paul leaned forward, brow furrowed. He's saying he saw something, not that it killed him. Same difference, Jennifer snapped, too quickly. Her eyes darted toward Dave, then away, like she was afraid of catching something just by looking too long. Dave didn't answer right away. He sat still, his shoulders slumped, staring at the condensation sliding down his glass. Finally, he whispered, I never wanted to tell you. I thought if I kept it quiet, it would stay quiet too. It? Asked Rachel. Her voice was soft, but her hand clutched the stem of her wine glass, as if bracing for an answer she didn't want. Dave raised his eyes slowly. The thing on his back. The shadow. It wasn't just clinging to him. It was feeding on him. Like he was carrying it without knowing. And when it turned, he stopped. The words caught in his throat. What? Paul pressed. His tone was gruff, impatient, but the edge of fear made it thin. Dave swallowed hard. His voice was almost a whisper. When it turned, it smiled at me. Not like a person smiles. It stretched too wide, like the skin of its face wasn't made for it, like it was breaking itself just to show me its teeth. And when it grinned, I knew. Knew what? Rachel asked, her voice barely audible. Dave's hand tightened into a fist. That it had noticed me. That now it had my face, too. Jennifer stood suddenly, her chair scraping loud against the polished floor. This is ridiculous. We're supposed to be celebrating, not scaring each other with ghost stories. But no one moved to agree. Paul's jaw clenched. Rachel looked pale, her eyes fixed on the empty chair at the table. Even Michael, who rarely spoke, stared into his drink as if it might offer an escape. The weight of Dave's words had already settled over them. You're saying... Paul hesitated, then forced it out. You're saying it killed him because you saw it? Dave shook his head. I don't know why it chose him. Maybe he was already marked. Maybe I just happened to notice. But I do know this. He leaned forward, his voice shaking but fierce. When you see them, they see you. And once you see their secret, they can't let you go. The group froze. Rachel whispered, Secret? Dave nodded. They hide in plain sight. No one notices them ever. That's their power. But if someone catches a glimpse, if someone realizes they're there, then you've broken the rules. You've pulled back the veil, and they don't forgive that. Jennifer scoffed, but her voice faltered. So what? It smiled at you to warn you, to say you're next. Dave's lips trembled. He didn't answer right away. His silence was louder than words. And then, finally, it wasn't a warning. It was a promise. The air seemed to thin in the lounge. Even the distant chatter of strangers and the clink of glasses felt like they belonged to another world. Michael spoke for the first time, his tone flat. You should have told us sooner. Dave shook his head violently. No. If I said it then, you would have started looking too. You'd have searched the corners, the shadows, and the moment you noticed, the moment you saw, he broke off, his face pale. Jennifer whispered, You mean it might come for us too, just because we heard this? Dave's jaw clenched. He didn't say yes, but he didn't say no either. For a long moment, no one breathed. Then Rachel set her glass down with trembling hands. I've had dreams, she admitted softly. Not often, just shadows at the edge of the bed. I thought they were nightmares. But now, stop, Jennifer snapped, her voice sharp with fear. Don't feed this. It's just a story. Just Dave's guilty conscience. But the way her eyes darted to the corners of the room betrayed her. The shadow of a plant in the lamplight stretched across the wall. For a heartbeat, it looked like something hunched, clutching at shoulders that weren't there. Jennifer shuddered and turned her face away. Dave's voice dropped to a whisper, each word heavy. The smile wasn't human. It wasn't joy. It wasn't anger. It was hunger, like it had waited years for someone to finally notice it, and it was glad I had. His hands trembled as he reached for his drink again. Though he never lifted it to his lips, it smiled because it knew. One day, it would be my turn. No one argued this time. The empty chair at the table seemed closer now, as if Mark's ghost had returned to sit with them. And behind every laugh in the lounge, every flicker of shadow in the lamplight, they thought they saw it, something hunched, clinging, waiting for the next one to step forward. The lounge had grown quieter as the night deepened. Strangers drifted out, the staff polished glasses behind the bar, the air heavy with the last breath of whiskey and smoke. The six friends remained, their circle tighter now, voices hushed, glances sharp at every flicker of shadow. Jennifer tapped her empty glass against the table, her hand trembling though she tried to hide it. We should stop this, she said, almost pleading. We're spooking ourselves. This is what happens when you tell ghost stories in the middle of the night. But no one laughed this time, because none of them could shake the feeling that someone else had joined them at the table. It began with Rachel. She leaned back suddenly, her breath catching in her throat. What is it? Paul asked, startled. Rachel's eyes were wide, fixed on the glossy surface of the table. The lamp above cast their reflections down in fractured amber light. Six faces stared up from the glass until she pointed with a shaking finger. There, she whispered. Do you see it? They all leaned closer. The reflections swam in distorted light. Six faces, six bodies, And then, something more. A blur, dark, crouched low behind Dave's shoulders. Jennifer recoiled at once. No, it's a trick of the light. But the reflection did not move like light. It shifted when Dave shifted, clung tighter when he leaned back. Paul swore under his breath. There's something on you, Dave. Dave froze, his face drained of color. He didn't dare turn around, didn't dare move at all. Don't look, he whispered. If you look too long, it'll know. But it was too late. The thing in the glass stirred. It lifted its head, slowly, as though waking from sleep. The hollow of its face caught the lamplight, revealing not features, but absence. A pit where eyes should be, a slit that opened wider until it stretched into a smile too broad, too sharp, too knowing. Jennifer clamped her hands over her mouth to stifle a scream. Rachel began to sob quietly, shaking her head as if to erase the sight from her mind. Even Paul, who had mocked the story minutes earlier, sat frozen, his breath ragged. Do you see it now? Dave's voice was thin, breaking. His eyes stared forward, fixed on nothing. That's what I saw that night. That's what smiled at me before Mark stepped into the street. The figure's reflection tilted, almost playfully, as though pleased to be noticed. Its grin widened further, until cracks formed along its shadow skin, as if it would split apart from joy. And then, slowly, it raised one long arm, fingers spider-like, curling around Dave's reflected shoulder. No, Jennifer cried, shoving back her chair. It toppled, clattering across the floor. The bartender glanced up, annoyed, but none of them cared. Rachel's sobs grew louder. Michael muttered a prayer under his breath, words tripping over each other in desperation. Paul slammed his hand over the table, shattering the illusion for a moment, the reflections rippling, scattering, but when the glass stilled again, the shadow was still there, still clinging. Only now, its head was turned not toward Dave, toward them. Its hollow socket stared from the reflection, sweeping across each of their faces, and as its gaze passed, each of them felt it, an icy weight pressing down on their shoulders, as if fingers lingered where none should be. Jennifer screamed outright, pushing past Rachel to flee toward the door, but when she reached the glass entryway, she stopped dead. Her reflection stood waiting, and on her reflection's back, the same shadow clung, smiling. She stumbled back, nearly falling. It's on me too. Oh God, it's on me too. No, Dave said hoarsely. He clutched his temples, shaking his head. It doesn't stay on one. Once you see it, it doesn't matter whose back it's on. It only needs you to know. Paul snarled, his voice cracking with fear. Then what does it want? Dave's eyes burned with a terrible clarity. To finish what it started. The lights above them flickered. The shadows on the walls stretched long, twitching unnaturally, as though the lamps themselves bent under a weight they couldn't bear. Rachel's sobs turned to ragged gasps. I can feel it breathing. Don't listen, Dave barked, though his own voice shook. Don't give it anything more. But the thing was already feeding. They felt it in the heaviness of the air, in the cold that settled deep in their bones. It wasn't clawing, wasn't dragging them into death. Not yet. It was savoring something else. Fear, despair, the certainty that no one leaves untouched. The bartender approached, irritation etched across his face. Hey, you people need to calm down or take it outside. But when he reached the edge of their table, his eyes flicked to the glass. He stopped, his mouth opened slightly. Confusion first, then terror. He backed away, muttering something under his breath, retreating toward the bar without another word. The friends stared at each other, the truth undeniable now. This wasn't just Dave's guilty memory. It was real, and they all saw it. The shadow lingered, its grin frozen in the reflection like a carved wound. No one moved. No one dared to breathe too loud, until Dave whispered the words they all feared most. Once you see a spirit, it sees you. All of you. The lounge door slammed open. The six of them spilled into the night air, their voices ragged, footsteps uneven on the pavement. Jennifer bent double, gasping, one hand clutching her chest. Rachel clung to Paul's arm, her eyes darting wildly as though she expected the thing to leap from every shadow. Dave staggered last, pale as bone, his breath shallow. He felt no relief in the open air. The night was heavy, suffocating, the streetlights flickering too faint to push the darkness back. They thought they had left it inside, but the silence outside told them otherwise. The street was nearly empty, the hum of traffic distant. A wind stirred, carrying the smell of asphalt, damp stone, and the faint metallic tang of something else, something that reminded them of the night Mark died. Michael whispered, "It's gone. It has to be gone. We're out here now." But Jennifer shook her head violently. No, I can feel it. On me. Behind me. Don't you feel it?" Paul cursed under his breath, rubbing the back of his neck as if something weighed on it. "It's not inside anymore. It's out here with us." They moved together down the sidewalk, a cluster of shuffling figures beneath the buzzing lamps. Their reflections followed in the dark glass of shop windows. Fractured, uneasy, Rachel was the first to notice. She stopped dead, pointing with a trembling hand. "Look," she whispered. They turned toward the nearest storefront window. 6 reflections, and behind them 7. A shadow crouched, clinging to their group as if it had always been there, its shape rippling faintly against the glass. The grin returned, wide and breaking. Rachel screamed, stumbling back into the street. Paul caught her before she fell, dragging her to the curb. But in the reflection, the thing didn't stumble. It stayed steady, riding them like it had no need for balance. "It's still here," Jennifer choked out. "We can't outrun it." Dave's voice was hollow. "I told you, once you see it, it sees you. That's the rule. And now it's not just me, it's all of us." They hurried on, no longer speaking, only breathing in short, panicked bursts. The night seemed endless, the street stretching longer than it should, each pool of light from the lamps smaller, swallowed quicker by the dark. Michael muttered prayers again, clutching a small cross he wore under his shirt. His lips moved fast, but his eyes flicked constantly to the shadows pooling at the edges of buildings. Every step echoed too loudly. Every echo carried a second beat, like someone else walked behind them. They reached the parking lot at last. Their cars sat in uneven rows, dark hulks gleaming faintly under weak lamps. Jennifer bolted for her car, fumbling her keys. The others followed, scattering, desperate to escape. But Dave stood still. He couldn't make himself move, because in the glass of every car window, in the gleam of every polished surface, the thing waited. Sometimes crouched, sometimes stretched tall, always smiling. And now it was no longer clinging to just one of them. It was on all of them. Paul cursed loudly, slamming his fist against his hood. "What do we do, Dave? You're the one who saw it first. How do we make it stop?" Dave's voice cracked. "You can't. You can only wait." Jennifer turned on him, fury and terror in her eyes. "Wait for what?" Dave looked away. He couldn't answer, because he remembered the night of graduation, remembered how long the smile lingered after Mark was gone. It didn't take life quickly. It didn't need to. It only needed them to know. Rachel sobbed into her hands. "It'll kill us all, one by one, like it killed him." "No," Dave whispered. His voice was so soft they almost missed it. They turned to him. He stared at his trembling hands, pale in the lamplight. "Not kill. That's not what it feeds on. It feeds on the dread before the end. The way your chest tightens every time you turn around. The way you start wondering when your turn comes. It takes that. It savors it. And when it's had enough," his words trailed off into the cold. Jennifer shook her head, frantic. "No, I'm not living like that. I won't let it have me." She yanked open her car door, climbing inside. Paul shouted after her, "Don't drive like this, Jen." But she slammed the door and started the engine. The headlights flared, harsh against the night, and in the glare of those beams, they all saw it. For the first time, not just in glass, not in reflection, but standing there in the lot. A shape, blacker than shadow, its limbs too long, its grin wide enough to split the dark. Jennifer screamed and floored the accelerator. The car lurched forward, tires squealing, but the shape didn't move. It only bent lower, its face tilting toward her windshield. Her headlights flickered once, twice, and then went out. The engine died. The car rolled to a halt, silent. Inside, Jennifer sat shaking, her mouth open in a silent scream, her eyes fixed on something none of the others could see. And when Paul rushed to her window, she looked at him as though she were already half gone. The others backed away slowly, terror thick in their throats. Michael clutched his cross tighter. Rachel clung to Paul's arm again, sobbing. Dave stood apart, his expression hollow. "It's not just following anymore," he whispered. "It's here, out with us." They looked around, desperate for proof it wasn't true. But every shadow swayed wrong. Every reflection smiled. Every breath of the night carried the weight of a seventh presence. And somewhere in the dark, a laugh stirred. Not loud, not human, just a crack in silence like a grin breaking into sound. The parking lot never truly emptied that night. Engines started, tires screeched, doors slammed shut. One by one they fled into the darkness, desperate to put miles between themselves and the thing that had smiled at them. But distance didn't help, because every mirror in every car carried it, every window reflected it, and every shadow reminded them they were no longer alone. Jennifer drove until the gaslight glowed red. She kept her eyes fixed on the road, refusing to look at the rearview mirror. But she could feel it there, weight on her shoulders, breath at her ear. Rachel and Paul huddled together, whispering prayers neither of them remembered fully. Michael clutched his cross until his knuckles bled. And Dave sat in his own silence, watching his reflection tremble in the windshield. He knew what they all refused to admit. It didn't matter where they ran. It had marked them, and once it marked you, there was no hiding. Days passed. Jennifer quit her job. Rachel stopped sleeping. Paul snapped at shadows that weren't there. Michael locked himself inside his apartment, crucifixes nailed to every wall, and Dave stopped answering calls, because every time he closed his eyes, he saw the smile. Wider, closer, patient. When they met again weeks later, drawn together not by choice but by fear, they found themselves speaking in whispers, as though afraid the thing might overhear. "It's not just us," Rachel said, her face hollowed by sleepless nights. "My sister, she told me she dreamed of it. She doesn't even know the story, but she dreamed of it." Paul clenched his fists. How could she? She wasn't there. Dave lifted his head slowly, eyes sunken. "Because it spreads. That's how it works. You tell someone, they imagine it, and the moment they imagine it, it knows them." Jennifer's voice broke. "So, it's not just feeding on us, it's multiplying." The room fell silent, their breathing shallow. Michael whispered, "Then we're cursed, forever." But Dave shook his head. "Not cursed, chosen. It doesn't want quick deaths. It doesn't want blood. It wants awareness. The dread that grows once you know you can't unsee it." He leaned forward, his voice low, trembling. "That's why it smiled at me 10 years ago. Because it knew the story wouldn't stay buried. One day, I would tell it. And the moment I did," his eyes lifted to theirs, hollow and wet, "it found you too." The others shuddered, glancing over their shoulders. Shadows twitched in the corners. The room seemed crowded, though it held only 6, and Dave kept speaking, his voice barely above a whisper. "That's its secret. That's what it guards. If you know about it, if you hear its name, if you picture its smile, it's already there." He paused, his gaze fixed on the dark window pane, where 7 figures now stared back. 6 of flesh, 1 of shadow. You don't need to see it for it to see you. You only need to listen. No one dared reply, because they all felt it now, the weight on their shoulders, the chill on their necks, as if the act of hearing the words had summoned it closer, and maybe that was the truth. So remember this, dear listener. If your breath feels heavier in the dark tonight, if your reflection doesn't move quite when you do, if your shoulders ache with a weight you cannot explain, it may not be imagination. It may be that something has climbed onto you, crouched low, smiling where you cannot see, because now you know its story. And once you know, it knows you. The secret beneath the concrete. Houses carry memories. Some wear them lightly, scratches on door frames, names carved into wood. Others hold them deeper, pressed into the walls, into the floor, into the silence itself. This house, it carried its memories like a wound that refused to close. They had bought it cheap, too cheap, a 2-story home at the edge of a small town, with paint peeling from its shutters and ivy curling up the porch. The kind of place realtors called charming fixer-upper. For Harold and Evelyn, an old couple with savings thinning and children long gone, it felt like a bargain, maybe even a blessing. "Just needs love," Harold had said, standing proudly in the bare kitchen, dust motes dancing in the sunlight. Evelyn smiled, but something in her chest felt unsettled. The first dream came on their second night. Evelyn woke with the taste of metal on her tongue. The room was thick with dark. the air damp and cold, and at the foot of the bed stood a man. She couldn't see his face clearly, only the outline. Tall, broad-shouldered, clothes that looked like workwear, heavy boots darkened with stains. His voice was low, rough as gravel. "That's me," he said. "This is my house." Evelyn gasped awake, clutching her chest. Harold stirred beside her, grumbling. She said nothing. It was just a dream, she told herself. Just a dream. But the dream returned, night after night. And then Harold confessed quietly, over coffee one morning, that he had seen the man too. The end of the bed, Harold said, his spoon clinking against the cup. He stands there, watching, says the same words every time. Evelyn's blood ran cold. "That's me. This is my house." They tried to dismiss it. Old minds, old bodies, restless in a new place. But the dreams persisted. Sometimes they woke screaming. Sometimes they woke in silence, both too afraid to speak, both knowing the other had seen him again. Evelyn began to dread the nights, dreading the moment the figure would appear. Harold grew pale, thinner, his hands trembling as if carrying an invisible weight. Within months, his health collapsed. Doctors said his heart was failing, that age had finally caught him. But Evelyn knew better. She had seen the way Harold looked at the end of the bed in those final nights, not with confusion, but with recognition, as though he had started to believe the man's claim, as though the house had won him back. When Harold died, Evelyn packed slowly, folding shirts that no longer smelled of him, boxing up books he would never read again. She left the house key on the counter and walked away without looking back. But the story of the house did not end with her. Their son, Thomas, was a practical man, an architect. He did not believe in ghosts, not even when his mother whispered about the man in the dreams. "They were just nightmares," he said gently. "Dad was sick. You were grieving. You both imagined the same thing because you fed off each other's fear." Evelyn shook her head. "You'll see. If you stay there, you'll see him too." Thomas smiled, confident. "I'll stay a week, just to prove you wrong." The first night the house was quiet, too quiet. The walls seemed to hum faintly, as though holding a breath. Thomas slept with a notebook at his side, ready to record the moment he woke, to prove to himself how silly the fear had been. And yet at 3 a.m., he found himself sitting upright, heart racing, staring at the end of the bed. The man stood there, broad-shouldered, boots darkened. "That's me," the man said. His voice filled the room, though his lips never moved. "This is my house." Thomas turned on the lamp. The room was empty, but the air reeked faintly of rust. By the third night, the dreams had turned heavier, harder to dismiss. Thomas would wake with sweat soaking his shirt, his heart pounding as if it wanted to tear itself free. The man didn't only stand at the end of the bed now. Sometimes he leaned closer, his breath sour against Thomas's cheek. Sometimes Thomas felt the mattress dip, as though weight pressed beside him, and always the same words. "That's me. This is my house." Thomas, stubborn, refused to yield to fear. He turned to research, scouring the county archives by day. That was when he found it. The house had not always been a home. Decades ago, it had been built over the ruins of a slaughterhouse, a place of knives and hooks, of blood running down drains. The floor plan was nearly identical, the walls raised on the same foundations, the cement poured over what once had been killing floors. Thomas felt a chill run through him. But still, he searched deeper. One night, he pulled at a corner of the living room carpet and found a crack in the cement below. The slab was old, uneven, patched in places where the concrete was darker, rougher, almost as if someone had tried to hide something. He rented a hammer drill the next morning. The sound of it thundered through the house, dust rising like smoke. For hours he worked, sweat dripping, arms shaking, and then the drill bit struck something hollow. Thomas knelt, brushing dust away. The cracked cement crumbled under his hands. Beneath it, the earth opened, and within that shallow grave, bones gleamed white against the soil. A skull stared up at him, jaw slack, teeth stained dark. He staggered back, bile rising in his throat. For a moment the house seemed to groan around him, the air thickening with the scent of rot, though the bones were long dry. And in the silence that followed, he heard it. A whisper, not from his dreams this time, but from the concrete itself. "That's me. This is my house." The police came at dawn, 2 officers, yawning into their coffee cups, trudged into the house with gloves and flashlights. They listened to Thomas's explanation with the flat, unimpressed faces of men who had heard too many wild stories. Still, when they saw the bones, their silence sharpened. They marked off the house with yellow tape. For hours, they dug carefully, lifting fragment after fragment, until a full skeleton emerged from the hollow in the floor. A man, long buried, left in the dark. One of the officers muttered, "Whoever he was, someone wanted him forgotten." News traveled quickly in the small town. By noon, the yard was crowded with neighbors, whispers curling like smoke. The old slaughterhouse. Someone died there. That family bought it for cheap. And now look, Thomas stood on the porch, arms crossed, watching as the remains were carried away in a black bag. His throat was dry. His mind spun with images of the man at the foot of the bed. That's me. This is my house. Had he uncovered the truth or invited something worse into the light? The town's pastor offered to hold a burial service. A modest affair. No name on the headstone, just unknown man. Thomas agreed. He even stood by the grave as the soil was shoveled back in, trying to believe the gesture mattered, trying to believe the restless dead could be soothed with ritual. The pastor's words hung in the summer air. Let the forgotten be remembered, and may peace return to those who wander. The crowd bowed their heads. For a moment, Thomas almost felt relief. Almost. That night, the house was quiet. Thomas lay in bed, listening to the hum of cicadas outside, the old beams creaking in the wind. His eyes stayed open long after midnight, waiting for the dream to return. It didn't. No man at the foot of the bed. No whisper in the dark. Only silence. For the first time since moving in, Thomas slept deeply, without interruption. But peace in that house never lasted long. The second night, he dreamed again. He opened his eyes, and there the man stood. Same boots, same broad shoulders, but something had changed. The figure's voice was quieter now, cracked and distant. "That's me," he whispered. "This was my house." Was. The word froze Thomas's blood. The man's form flickered, half shadow, half bone, and then collapsed into nothing. Thomas jolted awake, breath ragged. The room smelled faintly of dust and iron. He told himself it was only the mind playing tricks, clinging to memory. But the house was different after the burial. The floorboards creaked more often, as though something walked them at night. The pipes groaned deep in the walls. Doors that he locked before bed stood open in the morning. And worst of all, he began to hear knocking. Faint, steady, from beneath the floor. Tap, 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 as though the concrete was remembering what it had hidden. One evening, Thomas returned from work to find a neighbor waiting on his porch. An old man with sun-spotted skin and eyes that darted nervously toward the house. "I heard you found bones," the man said. Thomas nodded cautiously. The neighbor's lips pressed thin. Back in the day, they said the slaughterhouse was more than it looked. Said some men who worked there never went home. Folks thought they just left town, but he gestured toward the floorboards. Maybe not. Thomas felt his stomach twist. "You're saying more bodies?" The old man shrugged. "I'm saying that place has a way of keeping secrets. And now you've started digging." That night, the dream returned again. This time, the man didn't speak. He only stood at the foot of the bed, his head bowed, his mouth stretched open in a soundless scream. Behind him, shadows pooled, shapes shifted, vague and countless. Thomas woke with sweat cold on his skin, the echo of silent cries still ringing in his ears. He pressed his palms to his face, whispering, "It's over. I buried you. It's over." But in the silence of the house, the floor knocked once. Tap. And Thomas knew it wasn't over at all. He began to research obsessively. He dug through records, blueprints, rumors. Every detail he found pointed back to the same truth. The slaughterhouse had been a place of blood, yes, but also a place of disappearance. Workers had vanished. Travelers had never left town. Concrete had been poured more than once. Repairs, they called it. Cover-ups, perhaps. And as he read, Thomas felt the same itch in his bones that had driven him to tear open the living room floor. Because the house wasn't finished telling its story. Evelyn called him one evening, her voice tight with worry. "You buried him," she said. "So why do you sound worse now than before?" Thomas hesitated, then whispered, "Because I don't think it was just him." The line went quiet. His mother's breath was faint, trembling, "Leave that place, Thomas. Please, don't dig anymore." But Thomas didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the floor beneath his feet, where the knocking had begun again. Tap, tap, tap. This time, it wasn't faint. It was patient. It was waiting. Thomas couldn't stop hearing it. The knocking, soft at first, then insistent. Tap, tap, tap. It came in the evenings when the house grew still. It came at dawn, waking him with its patience. Sometimes he swore it followed him from room to room, as though the bones beneath the concrete were tracking his steps. By the end of the week, his nerves were frayed. Sleep slipped away from him. Coffee could not steady his hands. His blueprints at work blurred with shapes of skulls, his pencil dragging lines that looked more like ribs than beams. He told himself he could silence it if he dug again. On the third night, he rolled back the carpet in the dining room. The cement there was different, darker, patchy, as though poured in haste. The hammer drill screamed to life, its bit biting into stone. Dust rose, filling his lungs, coating his skin. His ears rang, his arms shook, but he couldn't stop. Every strike was a response to the knocking. Every strike felt like the floor answering back. Then the bit struck empty space. The cement crumbled, and the smell came. It was faint at first, the sourness of old earth. But as he widened the hole, the odor thickened, sweet and rotten, like something that had seeped into the soil and never left. He gagged, but kept digging. His palms blistered, blood smearing across the drill. The hole widened. Shadows deepened inside, and then he saw it. Bone. Not just one, not just a skull, but dozens. They lay tangled together, ribs interlocked, spines twisted, skulls piled like discarded fruit. Some jaws gaped open, teeth bared in silent screams. Others were crushed, flattened by the weight of those above. Thomas's breath caught. His chest burned as if the air itself had turned against him. He staggered back, but his eyes couldn't leave the pit. This wasn't a grave. It was a dumping ground. The slaughterhouse hadn't just killed animals. It had swallowed people, workers who never came home, strangers who never left town, the unlucky, the unseen, the unwanted. Concrete had sealed them in, layer after layer, a false floor over a hidden cemetery. Thomas dropped to his knees, tears stinging his eyes. The man in the dream hadn't lied. This is my house. But it wasn't just his. It belonged to all of them. The air grew heavy. A vibration passed through the floor, as though the house itself exhaled after decades of silence. Thomas looked into the pit again and swore the skulls had shifted. Their hollow sockets stared upward, not randomly but together, in unison, staring at him. And then the whisper rose. Not one voice. Hundreds, layered and tangled, all speaking through the same ruined throat. That's us. This is our house. Thomas clutched his ears, but the sound was inside his skull, vibrating through his bones. His vision blurred, the room spinning. He fell against the wall, gasping. In his mind, he saw flashes, knives glinting, hooks swaying, blood spilling onto stone. Men dragged screaming into darkness, their bodies never returning. He saw the cement poured over them, shovels scraping, boots stamping it flat, and he saw their eyes, all turned upward, waiting for someone, anyone, to uncover them. The whispers rose into a wail. Thomas staggered to the edge of the pit, clutching the rim. "What do you want from me?" he shouted, his voice breaking. The answer came as a hiss of air, as breath rising from the bones themselves. To be remembered, to be freed, to be seen. The words tangled, overlapping, echoing until he thought his head would split. The floor shook beneath him. Cracks spidered outward from the pit, spreading across the dining room like veins. Dust rained from the ceiling. Thomas stumbled back as another slab of cement caved in, revealing more bones beneath. An arm, still clothed in shreds of fabric. A rib cage collapsed inward. It wasn't just one patch of floor. The entire foundation was hollow. The house wasn't built on stone. It was built on a graveyard. Thomas fell to his knees, trembling. His mind screamed at him to run, to leave, to never step foot inside again. But another voice whispered louder, the voice that had driven him here. The voice that always returned when he found something buried. "You can't leave now. You've seen. You have to keep digging." The air grew colder. His breath misted in the lamplight. And in that mist, faint shapes formed, faces, outlines of bodies pressed together, eyes hollow but locked on him. They filled the room, crowding close, their mouths opening and closing with soundless hunger. And behind them, at the far wall, stood the man from his dreams, no longer alone, no longer whispering. He raised one skeletal hand, pointing down into the pit. Thomas followed the gesture, leaning forward, his face pale, his hands shaking. The pit seemed deeper now, endless, and from the dark below something moved. Not bone, something wet, something alive. Thomas stumbled back, his legs giving way, his chest heaved, his pulse thundered in his ears. He had thought the bodies were the secret, but now he understood. The bones were only the beginning. The whisper filled his head one last time before the room went silent. This is not a house. This is a mouth, and you've just opened it. Morning light did not soften what Thomas had uncovered. The pit yawned wide in the middle of the dining room, its jagged edges glowing faintly with dust. Inside, bones gleamed like pale roots tangled beneath the house. He hadn't dreamed it. The graveyard was real, and worse, he had made it visible. Word spread faster than he could have imagined. It started with a single phone call to the sheriff. By noon, the house was crawling with uniforms, tape, and hushed voices. Officers leaned over the pit with flashlights, their faces pale and grim. One staggered back, gagging at the stench that rose when the soil shifted. By evening, reporters had gathered outside the fence. Cameras clicked, microphones pushed forward. Headlines spoke of grisly discovery, of mass grave unearthed beneath former slaughterhouse. The town had always whispered about the place. Now the whispers had teeth. Neighbors came too, drawn by fear and fascination. Some stood on the sidewalk, muttering prayers. Others crossed themselves, shaking their heads. A few shouted angrily toward Thomas, demanding why he had disturbed what should have stayed buried. But most just stared, wide-eyed, as if waiting for the ground to split open and swallow the whole block. The sheriff tried to keep order. Excavators arrived. Men in masks carried buckets of soil, hauling them out in grim silence. Each time a fragment surfaced, skulls, ribs, scraps of clothing, the crowd gasped and pressed closer. A priest sprinkled holy water over the foundation, murmuring words that faltered when the floorboards creaked under his feet. And through it all, Thomas stood on the porch, hollow-eyed, watching. He had wanted truth. He had wanted silence. Instead, he had opened a wound, and the whole town was bleeding from it. The nights grew worse. Thomas no longer slept at all. When he closed his eyes, he saw the pit deeper now, stretching into darkness no shovel could reach. And in the dark, the faces waited. Not just one, not dozens, but hundreds. Their eyes glowed faintly, like coals under ash. Their mouths opened and closed, whispering words that crawled into his ears even when he pressed his palms tight. This is our house. This is our grave. You made us remember. The town began to change. Shadows seemed thicker at night. Windows rattled without wind. Dogs howled in chorus until their owners dragged them inside. People swore they heard knocking in their own homes, soft, rhythmic, echoing from the walls and floors. Tap, tap, tap. Children woke screaming, saying a man had stood at the end of their bed. The same man Thomas and his parents had seen. Panic spread. The mayor demanded the pit be sealed, the house demolished, the remains carted off. But the crews hesitated. Machinery broke down mysteriously, drill bits snapping, lights flickering out. Workers whispered of cold hands brushing theirs, of voices hissing in their ears. One man fled mid-shift, swearing he'd seen skulls moving in the soil, mouths grinning at him. The house resisted every attempt to erase it. As if it had decided, now that its secret was known, it would not go quietly back to sleep. Thomas walked the rooms at night, hollow-eyed, whispering apologies to the dark. He pressed his hands to the walls, feeling them pulse faintly under his palms, like veins beneath skin. He whispered, "I didn't mean to. I just wanted to understand." The air answered with a sigh. Not angry, not forgiving, just endless. And then the voices layered again, a chorus rising from beneath the floorboards. "You woke us. You woke all of us." He knew then the truth was larger than the house. The bones were not confined to its foundation. They stretched outward, under yards, under streets, under the town itself. The slaughterhouse had been a center, but not the end. The ground was seeded with bodies, fed by decades of silence. And by tearing open the concrete, Thomas had not just uncovered them. He had given them breath. The town lived in dread. Every gathering turned to argument. Some demanded exorcism. Some demanded fire. Some demanded flight. But no one truly believed they could escape. Not when the knocking followed them home. Not when the dreams came to their children. Not when they woke in the night and found footprints wet, muddy, human trailing across their kitchen floors. Thomas stopped leaving the house. He sat by the pit, staring into it for hours, listening to the whispers that curled up like smoke. His notebooks filled with drawings, skulls, ribs, endless rows of teeth. He barely ate, barely drank, and one night, as the town outside murmured and prayed, he whispered into the pit, "What do you want from me?" The answer rose, cold and steady. "You are the one who listens. You are the one who digs. You will remember for us all." He realized then that it hadn't been chance. Not his parents, not Harold's dreams, not Evelyn's fear. The house had chosen him, and through him, it had chosen the town. That night, the wind carried a smell across the streets, rust, blood, and rot. People gagged, shutting windows, but the odor seeped through cracks. The dogs fell silent. The knocking grew louder, and from beneath the house, beneath the concrete, beneath the soil, came a sound no one mistook for imagination. Breathing, slow, deep, patient, as though the earth itself had lungs. Thomas sat at the edge of the pit, his eyes hollow, his hands stained with soil. The house had become alive again, and so had everything buried under it. The dead no longer belonged to silence. They belonged to him, and to everyone who now knew. The house was finally condemned. After weeks of excavation, after countless bones hauled away in black bags, after prayers that never seemed to hold, the mayor declared it unsafe. The doors were locked, the windows boarded, and eventually, bulldozers came. But even when the house was gone, the land remained. And so did Thomas. He did not stay in the ruins. He could not. The whispers there had become too loud, the pit too deep. Instead, he left town, took jobs in other cities, moved from place to place, never long enough to be remembered, never long enough to grow roots. But wherever he went, he carried the itch with him. The itch to peel back carpets, to strike at concrete, to dig. At first, he told himself it was research, an architect's curiosity. He would examine the foundations of old buildings, searching for cracks, for history buried beneath layers of stone. But soon, it wasn't about design. It was about the silence that pressed against his ears when he placed his palms on the floor, the faint vibration that came when he knelt close enough. Sometimes there was nothing, but sometimes there was a knock. Tap, 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 and Thomas would dig. The years passed. He dug in basements, in abandoned warehouses, in forgotten factories, sometimes alone, sometimes under the pretense of renovation work, and in more places than he cared to admit, he found them. Not always whole skeletons, sometimes just fragments, a jawbone here, a rib there. Once, an entire hand curled tight into a fist, nails still biting into soil after decades underground. Each discovery confirmed what the house had taught him. Concrete was not just a foundation. It was a shroud, and the earth beneath every town carried secrets no one wanted to see. Neighbors began to whisper about him, the strange man who couldn't settle down, who broke through floors in places no one asked him to, who stared too long at cracks in the pavement, listening as if the stone itself were speaking. Children gave him a name, the Digger, a figure who searched not for treasure, but for the forgotten dead. Thomas did not mind the names. He had long stopped caring about the living. His loyalty belonged to the voices beneath, for he had come to realize something far worse than he had feared back in that house. It wasn't just one slaughterhouse. It wasn't just one graveyard. Everywhere he went, he found traces. Bones beneath schools, remains under roads, shadows locked in cement. The earth itself seemed seeded with secrets, and Thomas alone was willing to dig them up. He kept journals, dozens of them, scrawled with sketches of bones, maps of basements, notes about whispers only he could hear. One journal he never showed anyone. Its last page bore a single line written over and over until the ink carved grooves into the paper. "This is my house. This is my house. This is my house." Not signed by one name, signed by many. Sometimes in his loneliest hours, Thomas wondered if he was still himself, or if he had become nothing more than a tool and extension of the mouths that waited beneath the floors of the world. But then the knocking would come again, steady, insistent, tap, 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 and he would rise, pick up his hammer, and follow where it led. Years later, a construction crew in another city stumbled across him. He was crouched in the basement of an abandoned mill, dust rising around him, concrete broken into jagged chunks. They shouted at him, asked what he was doing. He turned slowly, his face pale with dust, his eyes hollow with sleeplessness, and he whispered, "Listening." The crew later told police they hadn't believed him at first, but then one of them swore they heard it too faint, muffled, rising from the exposed soil. A knock. Tap, tap, tap. They left without another word. No one knows how many discoveries Thomas made before he disappeared entirely. Some say he went mad and buried himself in the earth. Others say he still wanders, following the sound of hidden bones. But one thing remains. Old houses still creak at night. Floors still shift. Sometimes, late in the dark, you may hear a faint knocking beneath your feet. And if you do, if you press your ear to the ground and listen, don't be surprised if you hear him. Thomas, digging, and always finding more. The remnants of the past. He had stayed in dozens of rented apartments before. Business trips blurred into one another, airports, trains, hotel lobbies, keys jingling on unfamiliar rings. He never thought twice about it. A bed was a bed. 4 walls were 4 walls. The world, in his mind, was too practical for ghosts. But the apartment on the 7th floor was different. It was old, though not in the charming way travel brochures promised. The kind of old where the elevator groaned every time it moved, where the walls carried faint stains as if stories had seeped into the plaster. The kind of old that wasn't picturesque but tired like a body that had outlived itself. Still, he signed the lease for a month. Business was business, and superstition was for other people. The first week passed without incident. Days filled with meetings, handshakes, contracts, nights with takeout containers, and half-watched television. Then came the first sign. He was walking back from a late dinner, his tie loosened, his shoes echoing against the empty street. The night was calm. No traffic, no construction. That was when it fell. A bar of metal, long, rusted, heavy, came crashing down onto the pavement less than a foot in front of him. The sound cracked the silence like thunder, sparks leaping as it struck the concrete. He froze, looked up. No scaffolding, no workers, no sign of where it could have fallen from. Just the dark windows of the 7th floor, reflecting his stunned face. He told himself it was nothing, a discarded pipe someone had leaned badly, a coincidence, a fluke. But that night, when he lay in bed, the silence pressed differently against his ears. And then it sighed. Not the pipes, not the wind, something else. A long, low exhalation right beside him, as though the dark itself had lungs. He shot upright, his pulse racing. The room was empty, the curtains still, but the air still trembled faintly, as though the sigh had only just ended. By the second week he was restless. Sleep came shallow, broken. He told no one, not wanting to invite ridicule. Yet the building seemed to notice his silence and lean closer. The walls creaked when he walked past. The elevator doors lingered a heartbeat too long before closing. And sometimes, when he turned a corner, he swore the hall ahead was longer than it should have been. It was the 7th floor. Always the 7th floor. One night, his colleagues joined him for drinks. Laughter softened the strangeness, made the building feel less oppressive. 2 of the women stayed over in his apartment, sprawled across spare bedding, their laughter trailing off into drowsy murmurs. And that was when it happened. The weight pressed down on him first like invisible hands pinning his chest. His breath caught, his body frozen. Panic surged, but he couldn't move, couldn't speak. Beside him, one of the women gasped, her voice muffled with terror. I can't move," the other whimpered. "Something's on me." The room was full of them, struggling bodies, eyes wide open, pupils straining against the dark. And then they saw it. The floor, the bed, the walls, every surface dusted, covered, carpeted in feathers. Not the soft kind from pillows, but sharp, oily, broken quills, chicken feathers, everywhere. They clung to the sheets, drifted through the air, littered the ground in heaps that no window or draft could explain. When the paralysis broke, They scrambled to their feet, feathers sticking to their sweat-soaked skin. One woman screamed. Another began to cry. He stood in the middle of it all, his chest heaving, the stink of bird and dust choking him. It wasn't a prank. It wasn't possible. It was something else, something that had been waiting, layer upon layer, in the walls of the 7th floor. By morning, the feathers were gone. No trace, no piles, no mess to sweep, only silence, and the knowledge that they had all seen it, all felt it, the denial he had leaned on, the comfortable certainty that the world was explainable, fractured, and in the cracks, a question whispered through his mind. What had this apartment been used for before him? What had the 7th floor seen? He called the landlord, his voice tight. What's the history of this building? Has anything unusual happened here? The landlord hesitated too long before answering. It's just old. Some say people used it for gatherings. You know how rumors spread. Gatherings, he pressed. What kind of gatherings? The landlord lowered his voice. Not the kind you want to hear about. Not the kind you invite. And the line went dead. That night, lying awake in the dark, he realized the apartment was not empty. It had never been empty. And whatever lingered there had chosen to remind him not with harm, not yet, but with signs, with remnants, with pieces of a ritual that had once filled these walls with feathers, with breath, with silence. The apartment had memory. And now, so did he. The next morning, he told himself it had been exhaustion, a trick of the mind, hallucination born of late nights, too much drink, too little rest. But he could not shake the memory of the feathers. His colleagues had seen them too. They had cried and shaken and refused to speak of it afterward, swearing they would never set foot on the 7th floor again. Their silence did not comfort him. It condemned him. If they had seen it, it was real. So he began to ask questions. At first, cautiously, a comment at the cafe down the street, a casual inquiry with the concierge in the lobby. But each time he mentioned the 7th floor, the tone shifted. Faces grew guarded, voices hushed. Some brushed him off. Others looked away entirely, until an old woman, sweeping her stoop as he walked by, muttered under her breath, "Still renting that place out, are they?" He stopped. "You know about it?" Her eyes darted up to his, sharp despite her years. "I know enough." "What happened there?" The broom scraped against the pavement. "Nothing you need to stir up, son. Some places keep what was done inside them." She would say no more. Later that week, he found himself in a small bar at the edge of town, nursing a glass of whiskey he didn't really want. The bartender was a man in his 50s, heavy-browed, who seemed to know everyone's business. When the topic of apartments came up, he leaned closer. "7th floor, huh? I wouldn't last a night there." The man stiffened. "You're staying there?" "Yes." The bartender's eyes narrowed. "Then you've already heard it breathing." The words froze him mid-sip. He didn't need to ask what the man meant. He already knew. The bartender went on, voice low. "Back in the 70s, people said that floor was used for ceremonies. Not the kind with candles and prayers. The kind that left stains in the walls. Chickens, goats, sometimes more. They said the air smelled of smoke for days after. And always, always the feathers." He swallowed. "Feathers?" The bartender nodded slowly, covering everything, like snow that wouldn't melt. The room tilted. He gripped the bar for balance, his throat dry. "What happened to them? The people who did it?" The bartender shrugged. "They left. Or maybe they didn't. Depends on who you ask. But the energy that doesn't leave, it soaks in. You can tear up the floors, paint the walls, change the locks. Doesn't matter. The floor remembers." He walked back that night with the words echoing in his head. The floor remembers. And when he stepped into the building, when the elevator groaned and lifted him up toward the 7th floor, he swore he felt it. The closer he came, the heavier the air grew. By the time the doors slid open, he could taste it copper and ash, faint but unmistakable. The hallway stretched in front of him, quiet, empty, yet his skin prickled as if eyes watched from every doorframe. Inside the apartment, silence pressed close again. He sat on the couch, staring at the bare floor where the feathers had been. He tried to imagine it as it must have looked decades ago, rooms crowded with bodies, chanting, smoke rising, blood spilled. Not just superstition, a ritual, and rituals leave residue. That night, the dreams came. He saw the room full of people, their faces hidden by shadows, their voices rising and falling in rhythm. He smelled burnt feathers, iron, and sweat. He saw hands slick with blood scattering quills across the floor like confetti, and he saw the center of it all, a circle drawn in chalk and ash. Something crouched inside it, shape-shifting with every blink, at times a bird, at times a man, at times a blur of both. Its chest rose and fell with a slow, deliberate breath, the same breath that had sighed beside his ear. He woke with his own breath ragged, his shirt damp with sweat, the taste of smoke still sharp on his tongue. He tried to laugh it off in the morning light, but the weight lingered. The apartment had become a place that spoke not with words, but with memory. It replayed the past, a film that refused to end, and he, by sleeping there, had been cast as its newest audience. That evening, he decided to test it. He turned off all the lights, sat cross-legged in the middle of the room, closed his eyes, and waited. At first only silence, then the creak of the radiator, then the hum of the city beyond the glass, and then soft, deliberate, he heard it again. Breathing, not his own, low, measured, as though someone sat across from him in the dark, watching. He opened his eyes. The room was empty, but the sound did not stop. He whispered into the silence, "What do you want?" The air shivered, and the breath exhaled, long and slow, hot against his cheek. He staggered to his feet, heart hammering, fumbling for the light switch, but the bulb above him flickered violently, buzzing, and then went out. He was left in darkness, and in that darkness, the floor whispered back not with words, but with a memory of feathers brushing across his skin. By morning, the lights worked again. The walls stood still, but he no longer doubted the seventh floor. It was not haunted by a single ghost. It was saturated, soaked in ritual, in remnants, in things too old and heavy to fade. The apartment was not alive, but it was not dead either. It was simply waiting. He had promised himself he wouldn't speak of it again, but silence grew heavier than words. One night, over dinner with his colleague Anna, the story slipped out. He told her about the feathers, about the sighing, about the whispers of rituals long forgotten. Anna didn't laugh. She didn't scoff. Instead, she leaned forward, her eyes sharp with curiosity. "Show me." At first, he refused, but by the third glass of wine, her insistence wore him down. By the time the plates were cleared, they were already on their way back to the seventh floor. The apartment greeted them with silence. Anna stepped inside with the careful grace of someone entering a church. She looked around, touching the walls, glancing at the floor as though expecting it to shift under her weight. "So this is it," she whispered. He nodded, uneasy. They turned off the lights, leaving only the dim orange glow of the city through the window. "Now what?" she asked. He hesitated. "We wait." Minutes stretched long. The radiator hissed. Pipes groaned. Their own breathing felt too loud. Anna smirked at first, but as the silence deepened, her smirk faded. She pulled her jacket tighter, her eyes darting toward the corners of the room. Then, faint but certain, the sound came. A sigh. Not from him, not from her, from somewhere just between them. Anna's breath caught. She gripped his hand, her nails biting into his skin. "You heard that?" Before he could answer, the air shifted, and the feathers returned. They fell slowly at first, drifting from the ceiling where no crack existed. One, then two, then dozens floating, circling, settling on the floor, on their shoulders, in their hair. Anna gasped. "It's real." The floor creaked beneath them, heavy as if footsteps pressed down from above. And then the chanting began, low at first, a murmur that trembled the glass in the window panes, voices overlapping, rising, and falling in rhythm. Words he didn't understand, syllables that rasped like breath through broken throats. Anna clutched his arm. Where is it coming from? Everywhere. The walls, the floor, the air itself resonating with voices that had never left. Feathers now carpeted the ground, thick and black, muffling their steps as they stumbled backward, and in the center of the room, chalk lines appeared, not drawn by hands but bleeding up through the wood, as though the floor remembered its old wounds. A circle, symbols twisted along its edge, curling into shapes that pulsed faintly with light, and within the circle something began to breathe. He saw it first as a shadow, then a blur, then a figure half human, half bird, its wings broken, its body hunched, its face masked with feathers slick with ash. The thing exhaled, and the room trembled. Anna's voice cracked. This, this isn't possible. But the circle brightened. The chanting grew louder, and the figure rose, stretching its wings wide though they shredded into smoke. It turned toward them, and though its eyes were hollow, he felt them pierce straight through his chest. They stumbled for the door. The knob rattled in his hands, but the door would not open. Behind them, the figure stepped forward, feathers scattering with each movement, leaving trails of soot across the floor. Its mouth opened, and for the first time, the voices aligned. Stay. The sound was a command, heavy as iron, pinning them in place. Anna sobbed, shaking her head. We have to get out. But he couldn't move, his feet rooted to the floor, his chest heavy, as though the apartment itself had claimed him. The figure stepped closer, its hand, or what passed for one, lifted toward his face, dripping with soot and blood, and then silence. The chanting stopped. The figure froze. Anna screamed, yanking him backward with a strength born of terror. The door gave way, bursting open. They stumbled into the hallway, feathers clinging to their clothes, the air still vibrating with the word, stay. They didn't stop running until they were on the street, gasping under the indifferent glow of the city lights. Anna dropped to her knees, shaking, her face pale. That was no dream. That was no trick. He couldn't answer. His throat was raw, his mind a storm. But deep inside, beneath the terror, one thought gnawed at him. The figure hadn't wanted to kill them. It had wanted them to remain. That night, lying sleepless in a hotel across town, he still felt the feathers on his skin, still smelled the ash, still heard the chant. The seventh floor was no mere haunting. It was a ritual that had never ended. And now he and Anna had stepped into its circle. They swore they would never return. After that night, after the feathers, after the circle glowing where no chalk had touched the wood, both of them knew the seventh floor had carved itself into their lives. But leaving the apartment did not mean leaving the memory. It followed them. Anna was the first to crack. At work, she grew distracted, her eyes darting to corners of the office no one else noticed. She startled at the hiss of the air vents, flinched when papers rustled. One afternoon, she broke down mid-meeting, clutching her ears, whispering, "Do you hear it? The breathing?" They had to carry her out, pale and shaking. She took a leave of absence soon after. He didn't see her again. For him, the haunting was quieter, but heavier. At night he woke, drenched in sweat, feathers sticking to his throat though none were in the room. He heard sighs just as he was drifting off, long and weary, like the exhale of something older than the building itself. But strangest of all, he didn't feel hunted. Not exactly. I felt remembered. One night he stood in front of the mirror, staring at his reflection as the city murmured outside. He whispered into the silence, "What do you want from me?" No answer came, but as he turned away, he noticed the condensation on the mirror, his breath, and something else. A second fogged outline, exhaled right beside his, and in that shape, faintly drawn, were feathers. He thought of Anna, unraveling, thought of the bartender's words, of the landlord's hesitation. The apartment had never sought to harm them. It had only sought to replay itself, to remind, to make sure what was done there would not be forgotten. Rituals leave residue, energy demands witness, and the seventh floor had found new witnesses in them. He began to walk the city at night, restless. Every alley carried echoes. Every abandoned building pressed the same weight into his chest. He wondered how many places were like the seventh floor, how many walls kept their breath trapped, waiting for someone to listen. The thought no longer frightened him. It comforted him. He wrote to Anna once, after weeks of silence. "It isn't chasing us," he wrote. "It just doesn't want to be erased. Maybe that's all hauntings are memories with no one left to carry them." She never replied, but he kept the letter, folded neatly in his pocket, as if carrying it made him less alone. The dream softened. No more circles blazing, no figures looming. Only rooms filled with feathers that drifted like snow. Only sighs that seemed less threatening and more tired, like someone breathing after years of waiting. Sometimes he woke with a strange heaviness in his chest, but not terror, recognition. And so he began to tell the story, quietly at first, over dinners, over late-night drinks. He spoke of the seventh floor, of the rituals, of the feathers, of the sigh that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Some laughed, Some leaned closer, some looked away, suddenly uneasy. But every time he told it, he swore he felt the air lighten, as though the apartment, wherever it lingered, was exhaling in relief. It wasn't trying to kill him, it was trying to be remembered through him. One night, sitting by the window of yet another rented room, he whispered into the glass, "I remember. Do you hear me? I remember." And the glass fogged, just slightly, with an answering breath. The haunting did not end, but it changed. Anna had collapsed beneath it, unable to carry the weight of memory. He somehow had learned to live with it, to listen, to let the remnants of the past speak through him. He would always hear the sighs, always feel the feathers brushing faintly across his skin, but he no longer feared them, because they were not reminders of death. They were proof that the past, no matter how carefully hidden, refused to be buried. He left the 7th floor behind. The lease expired. The keys were returned. The door closed on that chapter of his life. But the story did not stay locked inside. It followed him. At first, it was only in his dreams. Rooms he had never visited, filled with feathers that fell endlessly from ceilings too dark to see. Circles drawn in ash, voices sighing, whispering, waiting. He woke with the weight of them pressing against his chest. And each morning, the urge grew stronger not to forget but to tell. So it did, in hotel bars, on late-night flights, in the quiet hum of business dinners when conversation lagged. He spoke of the 7th floor. He told strangers about the feathers, the sighs, the ritual that had never ended, and they listened. Sometimes they laughed nervously, sometimes they shivered and leaned closer. Sometimes they swore they heard a sound, faint and low, behind his words like someone else breathing through his story. But no one forgot. The more he spoke, the lighter he felt. The burden thinned, spread across more shoulders, but he began to notice something else. Those who listened closely carried it with them. A colleague once confessed she woke in the night to find feathers scattered across her pillow. Another swore he heard sighs in his hotel room after hearing the tale. And Anna, though she never replied to his letters, sent him a single postcard. No words, just an image of a white feather taped to the back. The haunting was no longer his alone. He came to realize this was what the 7th floor had wanted all along. Not blood, not fear, memory, a way to live past its own walls. And he had become the vessel. Years passed. He traveled farther, stayed in more rooms, told the story to more faces. It changed with each telling, but the essence never wavered. The circle, the feathers, the sigh, always the sigh. It became his signature. Some sought him out for it, curious about the 7th floor man. Others avoided him, whispering of the strangeness that followed wherever he went. But he kept telling it, because silence would only tighten the weight in his chest. One night, in a dim cafe in another city, he leaned across the table to a young man and whispered the story again. The young man's eyes widened. He shivered, glancing over his shoulder. When the tale ended, silence pressed between them. And then, faint but certain, both of them heard it and exhale, long and weary, rising from the floorboards. The young man's face paled. Did you hear that?" He only smiled. By then, he no longer wondered if he was cursed. He knew, but he also knew curses were only one way of naming inheritance. The 7th floor had chosen him, and now it chose whoever listened, not to punish, to remember. And so, if you hear the story now, if the image of feathers drifts behind your eyelids tonight, if a sigh brushes your ear when the room is empty, don't be surprised. It does not mean you are in danger. It only means the past has found another voice in you. The floor remembers. The ritual remembers. And now, so do you. The schoolgirl at the window. Every school has stories. Whispers that pass from class to class, decade to decade, until they settle into the walls like dust. Most are harmless tales of strange teachers, rumors of hidden tunnels, laughter echoing in empty gyms. But some stories never fade. They don't amuse. They don't soften. They wound. And in one small town, there was a school with a story so sharp, no one dared to speak it aloud in the halls. They called it simply the Forbidden Room. The room itself was nothing remarkable. A square of faded chalkboards, rows of empty desks, a window looking down on the courtyard. But the door was chained, and a sign hung crookedly, "Do not enter." Students hurried past it. Teachers avoided assigning classrooms near it. The janitors muttered that it was out of service, though none could explain why lights would flicker only there, why wires burned out when replaced, why even candles sputtered and died if carried across the threshold. But the students knew. They remembered. Years earlier, a girl had stood at that window. Her name was whispered once, shouted once, then buried under silence. A student, no different from the others until the teacher accused her, not of cheating, not of theft, but of something far heavier, a rumor, a scandal, whispers of affection between her and the man who taught her. He denied it. He turned the class against her, and in the end, shame became heavier than breath. On the final day, she walked into that room and did not leave through the door. Instead, she climbed onto the sill, her hands trembling against the frame, her eyes hollow from weeks of whispers, and she let go. Her body struck the courtyard stone. Her classmates screamed. The teacher vanished weeks later, his career ruined but his name intact. But the girl's name, her name was erased. All that remained was the window. Since then, the school carried its curse. Every year, on the anniversary of her fall, the power failed on the 7th floor. The forbidden room drowned in darkness. Electricians shook their heads, wires fried as though chewed from within. Some brave students smuggled in candles. None lasted longer than a few breaths. Flames bent sideways, gasped, and died as if invisible fingers pinched them out. Those who lingered swore they heard it soft at first, then louder, crying. A girl's sobs, muffled by walls that remembered. The most terrifying account came from a group of seniors, reckless enough to sneak inside on a dare. They laughed at first, pushing desks aside, lighting phones to banish the dark. But the laughter stopped when the window creaked open by itself. One of them pointed, his voice breaking. Something hung there, not standing, not sitting, suspended, a girl-shaped shadow, her feet dangling inches above the floor, her hair shifting though there was no wind. Her head turned toward them, though no face was visible, and in that instant, every phone died, screens black as stone. The students ran screaming, and by morning, not one would step foot in the school again. The school tried to bury it. The door was chained, the room left to dust. Teachers spoke of faulty wiring, bad construction, anything but truth. But the students knew, and so did the walls. Now, when new students ask why the room is forbidden, the answer never changes. She's still there, the older ones whisper, still standing at the window, still falling again and again. Every year she relives the last moment of her life, and the question that follows is always the same. Would you dare step inside, sit in her desk and watch her fall? Or would you turn away, like everyone else, and let her sorrow echo unanswered forever? Curiosity is heavier than fear, especially when you are young. Every generation of students whispered about the forbidden room, but most were content to keep the chain across the door intact. They laughed nervously when they passed it, dared each other with words but never followed through. Until one autumn, 4 students decided whispers weren't enough. It began in the cafeteria, voices lowered to conspiratorial tones. "There's nothing in there," Marcus said, the bravest of the group, or at least the loudest. He drummed his fingers against the table. "It's just an empty classroom with a broken fuse box. My cousin swears the school keeps it chained up to scare us." Lila shook her head. "Then why do the lights fail only on that floor? Why do candles go out?" "Explain that." "Drafts," Marcus replied. "Bad wiring. People see what they want to see." But his smirk didn't reach his eyes. By the end of lunch, the plan was made. They would slip upstairs after evening study hall, when the halls emptied and the janitors made their rounds. 1 phone each, fully charged. A flashlight, just in case. And proof. A picture, a video, something to silence the whispers once and for all. The 7th floor was colder than the rest of the building. Their footsteps echoed strangely, as though the hallway itself listened. The door stood waiting at the end. Rust streaked the chain. The sign still hung crooked. "Do not enter." Marcus grinned and lifted the bolt cutters he had smuggled in. The steel snapped clean through. The chain fell with a heavy clatter that seemed far too loud in the empty hall. For a moment, none of them moved. Then Marcus pushed the door open. The air inside was stale, heavy with dust, and something older like chalk mixed with rain-soaked stone. Desks sat crooked, covered in cobwebs. The chalkboard was smeared, as though words had been erased 1,000 times but never forgotten. They stepped inside, flashlights cutting across the gloom. "See?" Marcus whispered. "Nothing," but Lila frowned. "Then why does it feel like someone's here?" They set their phones recording, joking nervously, arranging themselves like explorers in a forgotten ruin. For 10 minutes, nothing happened. Just dust and silence. Then the first phone flickered. Lila cursed softly. "Battery's full, why is it dying?" Her screen dimmed to black. Moments later, another phone cut out, then another. By the time Marcus's flashlight faltered, panic had settled in their bones. "Relax," he said, though his voice cracked. "It's just interference." But the words died when the overhead lights, long dead for years, buzzed faintly and flickered. For a heartbeat, the room glowed, and in that light they saw her. She stood at the window, not walking, not shifting, just there. A girl in a faded uniform, her hair hanging forward, her hands clutching the sill. Her feet hovered inches above the ground, unmoving, as if gravity had forgotten her. Her face was turned away, but her body trembled, shoulders hitching with silent sobs. The light died. Darkness swallowed her whole, but the sound remained, crying, soft at first, then louder. A girl's grief spilling into the room, filling every corner, pressing into their ears until their own throats ached. Lila clutched Marcus's arm. "Do you hear that?" He nodded, his bravado gone. "We should leave." But the door had swung shut. When Marcus grabbed the handle, it would not turn. Behind them, the window creaked open, its old hinges groaning like a scream. The crying stopped, and the silence that followed was worse. Then came the whisper. "You saw me." The words brushed their ears, though no mouth had spoken. One of the boys dropped his flashlight. The beam rolled across the floor, stopping at the window. And there she was again, visible in the dim light, hanging in the air, her face still hidden, her body tilted forward as though ready to fall. Her foot twitched, her hand slipped from the sill. The students screamed, stumbling back, but the girl did not fall. She hung there, endlessly suspended, locked in the moment before death. Her head turned slowly, and this time her face showed. Note broken, note mangled, just eyes wide, hollow, burning with grief so sharp it cut deeper than rage. Marcus slammed his shoulder against the door. It burst open. They tumbled into the hall, feathers of dust clinging to their hair, their breaths ragged. Behind them, the door swung shut with a finality that rang like a bell. They did not speak as they fled the building, not even when they reached the street, gasping under the indifferent glow of the street lamps. But each of them carried the same image, a girl who never stopped falling, a sorrow no door, no chain, no silence could contain. They swore they would never return, but curiosity and guilt have a way of gnawing. The four of them could not shake what they had seen the girl suspended, the eyes that burned with grief too heavy to bear. For days, none of them spoke about it, yet each carried the same silence, and silence, between friends, becomes unbearable. So they gathered again, whispering in Marcus's garage. Lila's hands trembled around her soda can. She looked at us. Marcus stared at the floor. She didn't want us there. The youngest of the group, Daniel, spoke for the first time. His voice was hoarse. "No," she wanted us to see. That's why she let us in. That was how they convinced themselves to go back. Not to prove bravery, not for a dare, but to understand. The second time was worse. The chain had been replaced, but rust weakened it. They snapped it easily, hearts pounding as the door creaked open. The air inside was colder than before, sharp enough to sting their lungs. Dust shifted, though no one walked. The desk seemed different, too angled toward the window, as if every seat had turned to watch the girl's final moment. They spread out, phones in hand, though each knew they would fail again. The door shut softly behind them. Darkness thickened. The crying began. It built slowly, rising in waves, until the walls themselves seemed to weep. Daniel froze. His flashlight shook in his grip. "Do you hear it? She's closer this time." And then, without warning, the world tilted. For Daniel, the classroom vanished. He was standing at the window, hands gripping the sill, heart pounding, the courtyard below yawning like an ocean of stone. Behind him, whispers hissed his classmates' voices, twisted, mocking, a teacher's tone sharp with accusation. His chest burned with shame that wasn't his. His vision blurred with tears. He didn't cry, but the body he wore remembered. Her body. The others saw him freeze, his eyes glazing, his lips trembling as if repeating words they could not hear. Lila rushed forward. Daniel. He did not answer. Instead, he placed one foot on the sill. Stop him, Marcus shouted. They lunged, but the air thickened, pushing them back as though the room itself defended him. Their hands slowed, their voices muffled, every step an eternity. Daniel's body leaned forward, balanced on the edge. His gaze dropped to the courtyard below, and in that instant, the room revealed its cruelest truth. They saw two figures at the window, Daniel alive, trembling, and overlaid upon him, the girl. Her hair whipping though there was no wind, her face hollow with despair. Two bodies, one shadow, both ready to fall. Daniel gasped, his voice breaking free. It's her. She's in me. His foot slipped. Lila screamed, throwing herself against the invisible weight. Her hand broke through, clutching his arm just as his center of gravity tilted past the point of no return. The others grabbed her waist, pulling, dragging with desperate strength. For a moment, Daniel hung half outside the window, suspended exactly as the girl had been. The courtyard below blurred, infinite, waiting. Then, with a final yank, they hauled him back inside. He collapsed onto the floor, gasping, tears streaking his face. But the girl did not vanish. She hung there still, inches from the glass, her body suspended in the same eternal moment. Her eyes shifted from Daniel to the others, hollow, wet, burning with betrayal and sorrow. The crying filled the room again, louder than ever, so loud it rattled the desks and cracked the chalkboard. And then darkness, phones dead, lights gone. The room swallowed them whole. When they stumbled into the hallway minutes later, they were shaking, pale, barely able to stand. Daniel clutched his chest, whispering over and over, "She wanted me to fall. She wanted me to know." That night, none of them slept. Every time Daniel closed his eyes, he felt the weight of the sill under his hands, the courtyard pulling at him, the shame of a girl long dead smothering his lungs. And though the others escaped with him, each carried the same question: what would have happened if they had been a second too late? Would Daniel have joined her, or would they all have been trapped in that moment forever, repeating the fall that never ends? They thought escaping the window meant safety, but safety never returned. The days after their second visit crawled like years. Marcus, usually loud, no longer cracked jokes. He walked the halls with his eyes fixed low, avoiding every reflection of glass. Lila started carrying matches in her pocket, lighting them one after another, desperate for proof that flames could last. Each one sputtered out before burning halfway. The fourth boy, Eric, stopped coming to school altogether. His mother told teachers he refused to leave his room, whispering that shadows stood too close to his bed. And Daniel was no longer Daniel. He moved slower, as if walking through water. His laughter vanished. When friends spoke to him, he answered in fragments, distracted, as if half of him was listening elsewhere. Some mornings he arrived pale, his wrists faintly bruised as though unseen hands had gripped him in the night. He never admitted it, but they knew. She was still with him. Rumors began to spread through the school. It started with whispers in the cafeteria. Someone broke the chain again. The crying's back. My cousin swears she heard footsteps in the empty hall. By the end of the week, even teachers avoided the 7th floor. Students passing near the door hurried, their eyes wide, their shoulders hunched, as though bracing for a blow. The forbidden room was no longer sleeping. It had opened its eyes again. Lila tried to rally them. "We have to stop this. We let her in. We need to put her back." But Marcus shook his head, his face ashen. "You can't put grief back. Once you've seen it, it lives in you." Daniel said nothing. He just stared out windows, every window, as if the ground far below pulled at him no matter where he stood. One evening, as the sun bled red across the courtyard, the janitor found Daniel alone outside the chained door. The boy's hand rested against the wood, his forehead pressed close, as if listening. When the janitor shouted, Daniel turned, his eyes hollow, his lips moving soundlessly. The man swore he heard another voice speaking through him, a girl's whisper, faint but sharp enough to raise every hair on his arms. The janitor fled. By morning, the story had spread across the town. Parents began to murmur. Should the school be closed? Should the floor be sealed permanently? But older residents only shook their heads. You can't bury sorrow, one said. It seeps through walls. It finds a way. And the 7th floor had found Daniel. Leela visited him one night, disparate. She found him sitting in his darkened room, the curtains wide, the window unlocked. A pile of notebooks lay on his desk, every page scrawled with the same words. She didn't jump. She was pushed. The letters dug deep into the paper, as if carved more than written. Daniel, Lila whispered, you have to stop. She's using you. His eyes lifted slowly. Tears glistened, but his mouth curved in a hollow smile. She's not using me, he said. She just wants someone to see. By then, the whole school felt it. Lights flickered in classrooms far from the 7th floor. Candles during assemblies bent sideways before dying. Even the courtyard carried the weight of weeping when the wind moved just right. The forbidden room was awake, and through Daniel, it was speaking. Students avoided him now, whispering as he passed. Look, his shadow doesn't match. Did you hear him crying last night? He's not the same anymore. But none of them dared confront him, because each time his eyes met theirs, they saw not a boy, but a window reflected in his gaze, a window waiting to open. And so the school began to live in dread, not of ghosts, not of chains, not of an old classroom, but of Daniel and the grief he carried, and the room that had chosen him. By winter, no one spoke of the 7th floor as legend anymore. It was no longer a story whispered to frighten first years. It was alive, bleeding into classrooms and corridors, heavy in every window's reflection. And at the center of it all stood Daniel. He rarely attended class. When he did, he sat near the windows, his gaze fixed downward, unblinking, his notebooks filled with the same words again and again. She is still falling. She is still falling. She is still falling. Teachers tried to intervene. One placed a hand on his shoulder and swore she felt it tremble beneath her palm, as though another pulse beat under his skin. She never touched him again. Marcus dropped out. Lila moved away. Eric disappeared into silence. But Daniel remained. And with him, the forbidden room remained open, even chained, even locked. Its presence stretched through him, using his eyes, his silence, his body as its doorway. Students swore that if you glanced at Daniel's reflection in glass, you would see not his face but hers, the girl's, caught in the endless moment before she fell. Some said they heard crying in their own bedrooms after making eye contact. Some claimed they woke to find their windows unlatched, though they had locked them tightly the night before. No one dared confront him directly, because the grief had grown teeth, and it had learned to move beyond walls. The school board considered demolishing the building altogether. But how do you destroy sorrow? Concrete can crumble, glass can shatter, yet memory seeps deeper than stone. The 7th floor was not a place anymore, it was a wound, and wounds travel with the ones who see them. One night, a freshman dared to linger outside the chained door, filming with his phone. He whispered into the camera, laughing nervously, "I'm going to catch the ghost." The video was never uploaded, but his roommate found the phone on his bed the next morning. The screen showed only static. Beneath the hiss of white noise was a girl sobbing, faint but steady, stretching for 7 hours without pause. The boy himself never returned to school. By spring, the school carried a new rumor. It wasn't about the girl anymore. It was about Daniel. They said he no longer cast his own shadow. They said if you looked long enough, you would see him standing at the window even when he was sitting across the room. And most terrifying of all, they said if you listened closely, you could hear her voice not only inside the room, but inside yourself. Because grief does not stay where it begins. It spreads. And now, dear listener, it has reached you. You've heard her story. You've seen her window in your mind. You've felt the pull of that endless fall, the silence that comes after a scream. If you glance at the window nearest you tonight, be careful. If you hear crying in the quiet hours, don't rush to comfort it. And if you wake to find your curtain swaying though the air is still, don't look, because her sorrow has no end. And once you've looked into it, it looks back into you. The warning ignored, it began quietly, the way storms often do. A cough at the dinner table, a fever that lingered too long, a heaviness in the air that no open window could clear. The Whitmans had always been a healthy family. Sarah, the mother, prided herself on keeping her house clean, her pantry stocked with fresh food, her children well cared for. Her husband, David, was the kind of man who worked hard, laughed loudly, and never seemed to catch so much as a cold. But that winter, something shifted. First, it was their daughter, Emily. She came home from school pale, her forehead hot to the touch. Then their son, Jacob, too tired to play, curled up on the couch with a blanket he never wanted to leave. Sarah stayed up all night tending to them, cool cloths on their foreheads, hot broth pressed to their lips. She told herself it was just a flu. Children got sick. Children recovered. That was the order of things. But then David began coughing. At first, he brushed it off. "Just a tickle in my throat," he said, waving her concern away. But the sound grew deeper, wetter, echoing in the house late at night like something trying to crawl out of him. Neighbors began to notice. They crossed the street instead of waving. At the grocery store, Sarah caught them staring, whispering, "You hear about the Whitmans? All sick at once. Strange, isn't it?" Too strange. Sarah tried not to listen. She focused on caring for her family, her hands raw from boiling herbs, scrubbing sheets, disinfecting every surface. But the sickness did not lift. Instead, it deepened. One night, as she sat by her husband's side, Sarah felt it for the first time. The sensation of being watched, not by him, not by the children, by something else. The corner of the room seemed darker than it should have been. The curtains moved though the window was shut, and in that shifting gloom, Sarah thought she saw the shape of a woman standing perfectly still, her eyes fixed on David. When Sarah blinked, the corner was empty again. But the image remained, burning behind her eyes. By morning, desperation pushed her where reason would not. She drove to the edge of town, to a small, sagging house nearly hidden by trees, the home of Madame Ruth, an old woman people called a healer, a medium, a fraud, depending on who you ask. Sarah did not care what others thought. She needed answers. Madame Ruth opened the door before Sarah could knock. "I know why you're here," the old woman rasped. Her eyes were milky but sharp. "Your house is heavy with her." Sarah's throat went dry. "Her?" The old woman nodded. "A woman's spirit, bitter, bound. She clings to your husband. She feeds on him, makes him weaker every day. She will not let go." Sarah's knees buckled. She gripped the door frame to keep from collapsing. "What do I do?" she whispered. Madame Ruth's voice lowered, like she feared the walls might listen. "For 3 nights, he must not drive alone. Not through fields, not through woods, not through rain. She waits for that moment when the road is empty, when the world is quiet. That is when she will take him." Sarah swallowed hard. "And if he listens, if he stays home, then she may drift away. Spirits hate being ignored. But if he disobeys," the old woman's mouth snapped shut. Her silence was more terrible than words. Sarah drove home in a daze, the warning pounding in her ears. She told David that night, her voice trembling. She told him about the vision, about Madame Ruth's words, about the 3 nights that would decide everything. David laughed. "You went to her?" he asked, shaking his head. "Sarah, she's a charlatan. I'll be fine. I've got work to do tomorrow. I can't sit inside just because some old woman says so." "But she said nonsense." His tone sharpened. "I won't live my life afraid of shadows." That night, Sarah lay awake, listening to his cough echo through the house, her heart thudding with every sound of wind outside. She prayed the warning was wrong, but deep down, she knew better, because sometimes shadows tell the truth. David left before dawn. Sarah woke to the sound of the door closing, her heart sinking as if she had heard a verdict. She rushed to the window in her nightgown, pressing her hand against the cold glass. Through the pale wash of morning, she saw his truck rolling down the drive, tail lights winking once before the bend swallowed him. Her breath fogged the pain. She wanted to scream after him, beg him to turn back, but the words froze in her throat. She knew. The moment the engine faded into the distance, she knew. The sky was clear when David started down the rural highway. He rolled the window open a crack, letting in crisp winter air, convincing himself he felt fine. 3 nights, he muttered, as if I'd waste 3 days hiding at home. His laughter sounded thin in the cab, but beneath the rumble of the engine, another sound crept in a faint rhythm, like knuckles tapping gently against the glass. He glanced at the passenger seat. Empty. The back seat, too. Still, the tapping continued. He turned up the radio. but the sound persisted, syncing with his heartbeat until it felt less like tapping and more like fingers curling, reaching. By noon, the weather shifted. Clouds boiled across the horizon, darker than storm clouds should be, rolling fast, too fast. The temperature dropped, as if the world had been drained of warmth. David squinted through the windshield. Great. Just what I needed. Rain began in sudden sheets, slamming against the glass, drowning the wipers in a roar that shook the truck. Visibility shrank to nothing. The road blurred. The trees on either side twisted like silhouettes of people, arms outstretched. And then, headlights ahead. A flash of white. A figure in the road. David slammed the brakes, tires screaming. The truck skidded sideways, stopping inches from the shape standing in the rain. It was a woman. She wore a dress that clung to her like wet paper, her hair plastered across her face. She didn't move. She didn't even flinch. David pounded the horn. The sound blared, useless. The woman raised her head slowly. Through the curtain of hair, her face gleamed pale as bone. Her lips parted, and though the storm howled, he heard her clearly. You should not be here. The truck shuddered. Every light on the dashboard flickered, then went out. The engine died. The wipers froze mid-swipe. The radio fell silent. David sat in a cocoon of silence and rain, his breath loud in the cab, his hands trembling on the wheel. He reached for the ignition, turned the key. Nothing. The woman remained, her figure blurred by water, yet impossibly solid. David swallowed hard, forcing his voice steady. Get out of the road. She tilted her head and smiled. Lightning split the sky, bleaching the world white. For an instant, the road was gone. The truck sat in the middle of an endless plain of water, stretching in every direction. And the woman, she was closer, her face pressed against the windshield, her eyes, dark voids that reflected his own. David jerked back, gasping. Then the light vanished. The road returned. The woman was gone. Only the storm remained, drumming, furious. He turned the key again. The engine roared back to life as if nothing had happened. David exhaled in relief, gripping the wheel with white knuckles. Just the storm, just stress. But his words sounded hollow, swallowed by the rain, because deep inside he knew Madame Ruth had been right, and Sarah had been right to beg him, and still he had left. He pressed harder on the gas, desperate to outrun the storm. But storms are not outrun. They wait, they follow, and in the corner of his eye, through the sheet of water, he thought he saw her again walking along the tree line, keeping pace with his truck, head bowed, dress dragging through mud, always keeping up. The storm did not break. It grew. Rain hammered the truck so hard the roof rattled like a drum. Water rose fast, streaming across the highway, pooling at the edges. The wipers fought, helpless, their rubber squealing against glass they could not clear. David hunched forward, jaw tight, knuckles white on the wheel. He told himself if he just kept driving, he'd find clear skies. Storms always ended, but this storm wasn't moving on. It was closing in. The world outside dissolved into gray. Trees bent sideways in the wind, their trunks groaning. The yellow lines of the road blurred, then disappeared underwater. The truck's tires hissed and slid. The steering wheel pulled left, then right, fighting his grip. Through the roar, he heard something else. A woman's voice, low and steady, carried by the wind. Slow down. David's heart kicked against his ribs. He shook his head, shouting over the storm, "Leave me alone." But the voice came again, closer this time. "Slow down." His headlights caught movement ahead. The woman again standing in the middle of the road, her dress whipping violently, her arms at her sides. David slammed the brakes. The truck hydroplaned, spinning sideways, water spraying high in arcs. The world tilted. The guardrail rushed up. Metal screamed as the truck smashed through. And then nothing but air. For one frozen instant, David felt weightless. The headlights carved a pale arc through the rain. The world below was a blur of rushing water and broken earth. The truck plunged. Impact. The windshield shattered. Water surged in, icy, choking. David gasped, his lungs filling with cold. He clawed at the seatbelt, his body thrashing, the storm howling above and below. Through the spiderweb of broken glass, he saw her, the woman, no longer distant, no longer blurred. She hovered outside the cab, face to face with him, her hair floating as if underwater, though he was the one drowning. Her lips moved. "You should have listened." The truck sank deeper, swallowed by black water that hadn't been there minutes before. David's vision dimmed, edges closing. He slammed his fists against the glass, bubbles rushing upward like desperate prayers. The woman reached a hand toward him. For one terrible moment, he thought she was offering rescue. But when her fingers touched the glass, the weight of the water grew heavier. The cab groaned, metal twisting, glass bowing inward, and then silence. The storm's roar cut off as if someone had closed a door. The world outside was still. No water, no rain, no road, only darkness. Sarah would later say she knew the exact moment it happened. She had been pacing the kitchen, her hands raw from wringing the dishcloth, her ears straining for a phone call that never came. And then, in the stillness between thunderclaps, she felt it. The house shivered, just once, like something had passed through it, and she knew she was alone. Search teams combed the county for weeks. They found branches, mudslides, signs of flooding, but no truck, no body. It was as if the storm had swallowed him whole. Some whispered he had run away. Others claimed the earth itself had opened, burying him. But Sarah knew better, because every night, when she closed her eyes, she dreamed of headlights vanishing into water, and a woman's voice calm, relentless whispering, "Slow down, time did not heal." For Sarah, the years blurred into one long season of waiting. Every knock at the door, every phone call after midnight, every strange number on the caller ID sent her heart sprinting. She answered them all, hoping, always hoping, but David never came home. The town moved on. Storms were blamed. Mudslides, sinkholes, the bad luck of rural roads. The Whitman children grew older, carrying their father's absence like a shadow. Emily stopped asking questions. Jacob stopped mentioning him altogether. But Sarah could not. She lived between the stove and the window, the kitchen clock ticking louder each year, marking time he no longer shared. And every night, when she finally closed her eyes, the dreams came. The same dream. Always. Headlights through rain, a truck swallowed by darkness, and David's voice muffled, urgent, saying words she couldn't quite catch. 10 years passed before they found the truck. It was construction workers who stumbled upon it, digging to stabilize the hillside after yet another flood. Buried deep in layers of mud and stone, the truck's cab was crushed, the windshield shattered inward. Inside, waterlogged seats sagged with rot, but no body, just silence. Sarah was called to the site. She stood on the ridge as men worked below, their shouts carrying faintly through the air. She expected grief to hit her again, raw and sharp. Instead, what she felt was hollow, as though the years of waiting had drained everything, leaving only an empty echo. Yet when she looked at the broken cab, when she saw the mud-choked steering wheel, the warped metal, she felt something else stir. The dream, headlights, water, the voice. Not gone, not ended, paused. That night she dreamed again, but different this time. The truck was whole, dry. David sat behind the wheel, his hands steady. He turned to her, his eyes filled with a sorrow she had never seen in life. "Sarah," he said, his voice breaking. "I didn't listen. She didn't take me. She only wanted me to slow down." Her throat closed. "Where are you?" But his image flickered, dimming. His last words reached her like a whisper through rain. "She wanted me to slow down, so I could stay." Sarah woke gasping, her sheets damp with sweat. The clock glowed 3:07 a.m. From the hallway she heard it. A knock. Soft. Rhythmic. Not at the front door. At the window. The next day she said nothing to her children, nothing to the neighbors. But the sound haunted her, following her into daylight. In the hum of appliances. In the creak of the floorboards. In the tick of the clock. Always the same message, carried not in words but in rhythm. Slow. Down. The town buzzed with gossip after the discovery of the truck. Some pitied her. Others whispered she had known all along, that she had gone to a medium before David vanished. Sarah ignored them, but at night, when she lay in the half-dark, she felt the truth pressing closer. Warnings are not always meant to save us from death. Sometimes, they are meant to save us from something worse. And each night, as the dreams deepened, she wondered, Had David escaped death, or had he been trapped in something far crueler? Because when she listened closely, she no longer heard only his voice. She heard another, a woman's whisper, low, patient, unrelenting, calling not just to him but to her. The discovery of the truck years later did not bring Sarah the peace her neighbors hoped for, and though they pressed her hands gently at the market and left warm dishes at her door, though they spoke of closure as if the word itself could seal the wound, Sarah understood that closure was not what waited for her. What she felt, standing above the unearthed wreckage, was not an ending but an opening, a door left half ajar into a silence she could not cross. And each night as she drifted into sleep, she returned to that threshold, watching headlights dissolve into stormlight, listening for a voice that never truly left. The dreams came faithfully, as steady as the clock in her kitchen, and within them David appeared not as the laughing man she remembered, but as a figure weighed with sorrow, lips trembling as though the words he carried were too heavy to be spoken. And when he did speak, his voice was always the same, telling her that he had not listened, that the woman had not come to take his life but to spare him from a place beyond death where the lost are not released but suspended, held in an endless pause, unable to move forward and unable to return. At times it was not David but the woman herself who filled her nights, her wet hair clinging to her face, her hands pressed against invisible glass, her mouth shaping the words that haunted every silence in the house. Slow down. One winter evening, long after the children had grown and left, Sarah sat alone at the table, the tea in her cup cooling, the hands of the clock steady until, without reason, they stopped. The silence was thick enough to press against her skin, and in it came the faintest sound, soft and measured, like knuckles tapping gently against a window. The curtain swayed, though the night outside was still, and Sarah whispered into the empty air a question she had carried for years: why him and not me? And in that quiet space, as natural as breath, David's voice answered. He told her he was not gone, he was not at peace, and that he had not been taken but trapped, for he had failed to listen, and now he remained here, not in the world she knew, not in the world beyond, but in the space between, and the word here lingered in the room as if the air itself had spoken. It was then Sarah understood that warnings are not always given to save us from the end of life, but from what lies beyond life when we step too quickly into darkness unprepared. They are chances, small, fragile pauses, given to us in whispers or dreams, or the sudden knock of unseen hands, urging us to slow down, to wait, to let the road pass beneath us without rushing into its end. David had ignored it, and the price was not death but captivity, a captivity that echoed now not only in Sarah's dreams but in the quiet between each tick of the clock, in the rustle of curtains, in the rhythm of rain against glass. And you who are listening now, you have followed his story. You have walked the road with him and seen the storm gather. You have felt the tilt of the truck and the water rushing in, and because of that, you too have received the warning. You may think it belongs only to him, but the truth is that grief, like storms, travels, and once a warning has been heard, it becomes your own. So when the road stretches before you in the lonely hours and you hear a voice urging you to slow down, do not laugh. Do not dismiss it as a dream or a trick of your imagination, for some warnings are not meant to protect the fragile body, but to protect the soul itself from being caught in the silence where David waits still, forever reaching for the life he should never have left so quickly.